the faith. Now, I want to also say something to you about teaching methods, because I feel, again, this is one of our problems. But this idea of teaching, now let me first say, this idea of teaching, every Baha'i teaches, is something that is so vital. Like every day we must eat. It's just as important as that. The same way that we said every day we read the writings, every day we must engage somehow in teaching. And it's a daily thing. Shoghi Effendi mentions that. It's a daily thing. It's not once a month going from one town to another. It is something daily. I remember another important thing that I want to mention here before I give you some examples of this is that Abdul Baha mentions this, that if we do not teach the faith, divine assistance will be cut off from us. I'm sure you have heard this. Now you realize that God is very loving to all creation. And yesterday we talked about forgiveness. You remember that? We talked about forgiveness and how God's forgiveness, what things it can do with it. And I'm sure that God forgives all the things that people do. But there are certain things which to a Baha'i he cannot do. You see, God's assistance reaches the whole of this creation. If ever for one moment the assistance of God is cut off from people, they are not able to exist. The assistance of God reaches all creation. And God does not withhold his assistance from any human being. As long as they live, he's assisting them in whatever they do. If you go the right way, he assists you. If you go the wrong way, he'll assist you. Even the enemies of the faith are being assisted. Because God does not interfere in our actions. We have the free will. He shows us the way, yes. He sends his messengers, he shows us the way. He throws light upon our path. And he says, this is the right way to come. But it is up to you to choose it. And if you go this way, he'll help you. If you go the opposite way, he also will help you. It's like the engine in a car. The engine does not decide which way to go. But it will give you the power whichever one you decide to go. This is how God acts with us. This is how he... and now, he acts in this way. His assistance reaches all humanity. But it will not reach a Baha'i. Now imagine this, who does not teach the faith. And this is when the Baha'i becomes frustrated in his life. I become frustrated in my life. I become unhappy. Since I've become a Baha'i, I've become unhappy. Since I've become a Baha'i, I have all kinds of problems. It's the divine assistance which must come to us. And I can assure you that most of the problems that we have in our daily life or in our anything we do can be and will be resolved if we become throw ourselves into the field of teaching every day. Then things will happen to us. Great things will happen. One will change. Now, I'm not saying that one should say, oh, well, I have a lot of problems in my life, so I better go and do a little bit of teaching so that my problems may be solved. But I can assure you that many of our problems will be so removed from the scene because you will be elevated into a different world, and these problems will sort themselves out. They will completely go into the background. Now teaching, which is personal thing. I was talking about somebody in one of these gatherings some years ago, and a woman came to me and she said, look, I have become worried since you have been saying these things, that we must teach the faith every day, and if we don't teach the faith, God's assistance will be stopped from us. I said, I didn't say that. It's Abdul Baha who says this. Oh yes, she said, I'm worried still. I'm still, in any case, I'm worried about it. And she said, I am a very reserved person. I can't go out and talk to the people about the faith. I feel very embarrassed. I cannot teach personally. And now she said, what shall I do? I am worried, he said. She kept on saying this. I said to her, did you say you're worried? She said, yes. I said, that's very good. Keep on worrying. That's your solution to your problems. Really, and keep on worrying. This is a very good solution. If ever we are brought to the point of worrying about something, you're going to do something about it. Do you know that? When you find in your daily life, it's the same thing. If you lose your job, or if your family has some problem and you begin to worry, then you are going to put one foot in front of the other and something will happen. Well, this lady went away and she came back again. She said, I can't rest. We'll have to do something, she said. She said, I'm very reserved. I can't talk about the faith to anyone. So eventually, after talking about it, mentioned to her that, look, you can go and even though that you say you are very shy or reserved or whatever it is, go out every day. And she said, that's a good idea. She said, I will give 1 hour a day for Baha'u'llah. And this is a marvelous example. I think we should remember that. Why not give 1 hour a day to Baha'u'llah for teaching? 2 hours a day, maybe, but the minimum. And she said, I'll spend some time shopping, I'll spend some time at home. Why not give 1 hour a day to Baha'u'llah for teaching? And discipline yourself. And she said, I will go out. And she went out. She said, I'll go to a cafe. And I sit there. And she said she went to a cafe for 2 or 3 months, regularly. And the next time I saw her, she told me this. She said, it doesn't work. She said, I went there for 3 months, every day. I sat there, and many people came in the cafe and sat in front of me on the same table, shared the table. And she said, I could never bring myself to tell them anything about the faith. And she said, it doesn't work. I've given it up, she said. Now you see what happened in here, really, and this is another lesson we learn, a very marvelous lesson. You know, God, Baha'u'llah says that once you say you're a Baha'i, and once you enter the faith, He will test you. And always we are being tested, all the time. Remember that. As Baha'is, we are always tested. Now, it's not something that Baha'u'llah has invented and say, I'm going to test the Baha'is. In fact, testing, this is nothing new. This is a law of creation. This is a law of creation. Baha'u'llah mentions in his writings, God will test everything. He says, I will split a hair into 1,000 pieces. These are almost the words of Baha'u'llah. And each piece I will test. Now, test actually is a law of nature. You go to nature and you find tests. I'll give you an example of this. As long as you're sitting, nothing happens to you. But the minute you move, the air will resist you. If you go on a bicycle, have you noticed? When you're going on a bicycle, do you see how the air will resist you? This is nature. This is test. You're being tested. And the faster you go, the greater are the tests. The greater is the resistance. You see these aircrafts which are built up, which go twice the speed of sound. They go so fast that the air will resist it so much that the metal gets red hot. And they have to have a cooling machine inside to cool it off all the time, because it goes very fast. Nature will test it all the time. When Baha'u'llah says, I'll split a hair into 1,000 pieces and test it, this is true. Because if you look at the atoms, they're all the time under test. Each atom inside it goes through this cycle. Test is part of life. Every one of us are tested every day, without knowing it maybe. When you become Baha'i, especially. When you sit in a local spiritual assembly, we are tested all the time. It all depends how you look at your friend across the table. Just look at her like this. That's enough. I'm being tested. You know? You think of him in a wrong way. Not with love. Because Abdul Baha says the standard of consultation is love. Now if I look at somebody when he says something and I want to hit hard at her, you know how it is? Hit hard. Saying such a thing. I'm being tested. Hit hard in my heart, I mean. You know, I hope we don't get to action, but it's no use also to cover it up and be very nice and smiling, and then you hate in your heart, or dislike in your heart. That is what matters, what's in our heart. You see how we are tested? And so I am tested. And when I am tested, I cannot progress anymore. When you cannot pass the test, but if you pass the test, do you know what will happen? In our lives, when you are a Baha'i, when you pass the test, then greater field of service you enter into it. You will get to do greater service to the faith. You will want to do that. And as soon as you enter there, your tests become greater. Just like somebody who will go faster. Just like the aircraft which goes faster. Your tests becomes greater. And this is why people who have had not the capacity to pass the test, if they are in a higher position, higher functions, higher duties, they could easily destroy their souls. It's like a person who is flying in an aircraft. You see, if I'm standing on this platform and if I fall, well, I may hurt my knee. But if I'm flying in an aircraft and fall, that's the end. So if I work in a local spiritual assembly or a national spiritual assembly and I have all these ambitions in my heart and I'm not able to do the things right and I am being always, don't pass the test, I might hurt myself a little bit. I might become irritated, I might become cause of problems, but it is not fatal. And this is why those people who were close to the center of the faith, those who were close to Baha'u'llah, like man who flies in the aircraft, or those who were close to Abdul Baha, or those who were close to Shoghi Effendi, in the world center, if they had slightest impurities in their lives, if there was any feeling of ambition in their hearts, that little ambition will be magnified and will destroy them. You see? This is the history of our faith. This is why people who were very close to the center of the faith, a little bit of ambition, they will be destroyed. There is no room for ambition in the faith. And especially those who served near the center of the faith, their criterion must have been servitude. Absolute servitude, like Abdul Baha. He was safe. The purest branch was safe. The greatest holy leaf was safe, because their standard of life was servitude. Utter servitude and self-effacement. But the other family of Baha'u'llah, they all had ambitions. They wanted to be leaders. They wanted to be respected. They wanted to be honored. They wanted to be somebody. None of them endured, and none of them could last. They all perished, destroyed themselves. They were very close to the center of the faith. But there must have been a lot of other ambitious people in the faith, locally and nationally. Well, they hurt each other and hurt themselves, but it is not necessarily going to be fatal. So you see, friends, one of the things to bear in mind is that tests come our way, always. I remember somebody said, there was a very outspoken, beautiful woman who passed away, a marvelous person who became great. She brought so many people into the faith in England. But she was outspoken, and she used to say, you know, when I was not a Baha'i, I had no problems. She said, I had no problems with people. I was very happy with everybody. I had no problems. But as soon as I became a Baha'i, then problems appeared after the other, you know. And this may be in one sense true if you are not able to cope with it. If you are not able to really approach people with a loving attitude and pass the test. God always tests us. Now this woman that I was talking about, who was sitting in a cafe for 3 months, and people came in front of her and sat there, and eventually she couldn't say anything, and she said, although I trusted Baha'u'llah and relied on him, he said, go out and I will assist you. He said he didn't assist me. Now this is how we are tested. God tests us to find out how much faith we have in him. This is true. When you arise to serve the faith, you teach and nothing happens. And then you say, well, it doesn't work. So what happens? Really, you're losing your faith in him. This is how he tests you. And when I pointed this to her, she said, you are right. She said, I've been tested, of course. She said, it's my fault that this didn't work out. It is not Baha'u'llah's fault. It's my fault. Because I was not dedicated enough, I was not pure enough, I was not taking Baha'u'llah with me every day. It's my fault. And she said, now that you say, I'm going to sit there every day. I'm going to go every day, 1 hour a day. And I will go if it is necessary for years. I will not give it up. And if anything does not happen, it's my fault. And she went. And you know, she was telling us the story after 2 or 3 weeks. She said, a woman came along and sat in front of me. She said, I couldn't say anything, of course, to her, but she looked at my ring. And she said, what is this strange lines on your ring? Oh, she said, I became so nervous. I couldn't say a word now. She said, I was absolutely nervous. And I began to stammer. And the more I became nervous and stammering, this woman became more interested. She said, what is it? Well, I think she told her very little, and she said, look, you better come in here, somebody will explain this to you. And well, I can tell you this woman is a Baha'i. And this other lady is no longer a shy, reserved person. She is one of the best teachers. She's going around and teaching. You know, it's like a child who has never had a food before. You give him a little taste of it. Once he gets the taste, he likes it then. And then it becomes a habit for him. This is the way teaching is. And I feel the idea of 1 hour a day, or 2 hours a day, or 3 hours a day, whatever you like, you choose, is a marvelous idea for giving ourselves to Baha'u'llah for teaching, personal teaching. Now, it is very important that we must remember the difference between teaching and proclamation of the faith. And this is something, again, that I think in most communities that I am familiar with, we are mixing up the two. And as a result of this, we are harming rather than helping. You see, I feel that many people who hear about the faith and they don't come to follow it up is because of the unwisdom of the Baha'i teacher. We say the wrong things at the wrong time. We say too much. We kill him off in the first encounter. Really. We kill him off in the first encounter. And this happens, I believe, a great proportion of people who hear about the faith and do not come in is because of the unwisdom of the friends, of our teachers. And I will explain to you what I mean by this in practical terms. The first thing which happens is that we are so used in doing impersonal teaching that we think when I hold a public meeting in a town and I advertise it and people come there to hear about the faith, I think I'm teaching the faith there. I'm not. That is not a platform for teaching. If you begin to teach the faith there, you are going to do some harm. Now, I'm going to explain this to you, because I'm sure some of you may be surprised to hear this. Of course, when you go behind the radio, television, and the newspapers, you cannot teach the faith there. You can proclaim, you can give the message of Baha'u'llah. It's very different from teaching. To give the message of Baha'u'llah, yes, you do that. In a public meeting, in a hotel or somewhere, you hold it and you advertise it and people come there. Because people who come to the public meetings, they have never heard of the faith before. Or you must assume they have never heard of the faith before. You cannot teach a person that you do not know. That's a basic principle. But you can give him the message. That's all you can do in a public meeting, is to give him the message of Baha'u'llah, what it is. But we must not make an attempt, in my view, to... Very different, completely different. To give a message, yes, there is a public meeting, you are behind the radio, behind the television. There are certain things we must remember to do and certain things not to do when you are giving the message. I'm just talking about proclamation activities, like giving the message of Baha'u'llah in a public meeting. Remember, I'll tell you another story which perhaps will illustrate this. There was a man who for 10 years was telling me did not become a Baha'i. And I asked him why. Was this? He said, the first public meeting I went to, somebody was talking about spiritual things. Said spiritual assembly, spiritual this, spiritual that. Several times he used the word spiritual. And he said, I thought Baha'is are spiritualists. And I didn't like spiritualists. So any time during these 10 years that people talked to me about the faith, I said, this is not for me. You see how one innocent word could get into somebody's mind in the wrong way and deprive him of coming close to the faith. Well, I'm not saying it was bad to say spiritual things, but this man got the wrong end of the stick. People who have never heard of the faith before, never heard of it before, if you give them a talk which is full of new things, it's too much. They are going to hear some things which they do not maybe understand or may do not accept. And you always remember the things that you do not accept. If you put yourself in this place, you go to a meeting somewhere, meet some people. They are going to talk about their ideology. What remains with you are the things that you do not accept. Now, say for instance, now you go out today, hold a meeting, public meeting, invite people there, and somebody stands up and talks about the faith. Innocently, very innocently. Say for instance, do it this way. Say, you know what the Baha'i faith is? It's the faith of love. We love everybody. We love each other. Yeah, do that a couple of times. People who have no spiritual background, they're going to say, these are the people that we were hearing about. You know, this laxity in their moral standards is such that they say they love each other. Now you see, you have to be very clear of what you're saying. You have to be so clear in what you're saying that it will not give people the wrong impressions, the wrong things. And therefore, we come to this conclusion, that in such a talk which is given to the public, giving them the message of Baha'u'llah, not teaching them, we must be concise, we must weigh our words, we must not confuse the mind with a lot of names and histories, starting from Shiraz and the Bab and then the Siachal and Tehran and Baha'u'llah and Adrianople and Akka and Constantinople and the house and the Abdul Baha and Shoghi Effendi and the House of Justice and the teachings and the laws. This, you're killing him. You're finished with him. You're trying to give him the message. You're not teaching him here. You're giving him the message. Now, Shoghi Effendi tells us how we should give the message. He says you should follow the example of Abdul Baha's talks in Europe and America. You read the talks of Abdul Baha in Europe and America. Do you know what it is like? It's 10 minutes, sometimes less. And if you take out the 10 minutes talk. And what does he say? Never a controversial subject. Never a theological subject which somebody could come and argue with you. If you ever create a person who comes and argues with you when you are giving the message, then that's the end of it. We must give the faith when you give the message in a public meeting, should be so simple, and talk about something that people cannot disagree with, so that when the man leaves the hall, he will say, well, I agree with this. That's good enough. You have done a good job. Remember, you are not teaching him the faith. Look at what Abdul Baha said. He talks, I'm saying you should say Baha'i. You should say the word Baha'u'llah. But please don't use the word Abdul Baha and Shoghi Effendi and all the rest of it. You're confusing the man. Just Baha'u'llah is enough. What is the difference? And then what you can say, as Abdul Baha said, if he ever wanted to say something about Baha'u'llah, and he said Baha'u'llah has come in Persia, he has brought us these teachings, and many people have changed as a result of this. Their hearts have changed. They have become beautiful people. And today I want to talk to you about one of the teachings or two of the teachings of Baha'u'llah. And that's it. And what he said, it was something that nobody could disagree with. Now this is giving the message. But what we do, we go to teach the faith there in a public meeting. You can't do that. And I feel this is one of the problems we have. One of the major problems we have is this. We have to know how to give the message. You go and meet somebody in the streets, you want to tell him about the faith, you can't teach him there. You have to give him the message in a very nice way, in your own way. Whatever you say has to be simple, to attract him to yourself, to attract him to the cause. By all means, you can talk about some teachings, there it is, but not to go involve yourself in like a football match. You say something and he says something else, and you say something and he refutes and you refute, then that's the end of it. How teaching is different from this proclamation and giving the message. How different it is. Teaching, I'll tell you quickly now, in 2 or 3 minutes. Teaching, if you want to teach somebody, and this is what Baha'u'llah has said, this is what Abdul Baha has said, you must know that person. You must come to know him, you must love him, and sometimes maybe you have to approach him for months in your spiritual arms. You must embrace him, pray for him. And then, when you know, and then you begin to know him, and then you know what he believes in. How can you ever teach the faith to somebody without knowing what his beliefs are? Is he a Muslim? Is he a Christian? Is he an atheist? Is he an agnostic? What ideas he has? And then, having known all these things, and having loved him, and having attracted to him, you can bring him to your home and give him a cup of coffee, and there you can sit down, and then Baha'u'llah says, give him a little thing, not too much, just a little. He says, when you're dealing with a child, you give him milk, not a big meal. If you give him a big steak, he's going to go. You must decide what is then the best thing to give it to him. What's the best thing? It's just like his doctors. I know, for instance, in our family, my wife is very fond of this homeopathy, and I think it's a very good way of dealing with medicine and medical things. Now, how do they do it is that the doctor will recognize in you what you need to stimulate you, and he gives you a little bit of it. And that little thing which he gives you, stimulates you, is ready for the next dose tomorrow, in a few hours. And it's the same thing with the faith. You must know the person in wisdom and tell him some things. And sometimes you must not tell him some things. And even if he asks you a question, if you tell him something, it will be too much for him. It's going to put him off. You don't have to answer every question. You have to be able to bring him back to square one, which is the origin of the faith. It's the same thing with any profession. If you're a carpenter and somebody comes to you and he says, look, I don't know anything about carpentry, but I want to make this table with you today. You won't let him to make this table with you today because this fellow doesn't know how to hold a saw in his hand yet. You have to teach him first, prepare him for it for months before you can say, now this is the way you make the table. It's the same thing with the faith. If he has a basic question which is far ahead of him, you have to bring him back to the origin and try to begin to teach him. There are many things, and this is not a platform, I'm afraid, for explaining how to teach the faith. But in Europe, I hope that I'm hoping that as we go back now, and in some countries in Ireland, we've had some seminars for this, of how to teach the faith. And it has been, I think, useful, because it's essential to know so many things. I'll give you one example of this, and then I'll close. One person came to us, a woman, she said, I have a friend. And I have met him, she said, only a few days ago. I've told him about the faith. And I want you to talk to him. I said, well, I can't talk to him unless I know what he believes in. How can I tell him anything? Oh, she said, he just knows about the teachings. He's an open-minded person. He's an educated person. Anyhow, he came to our house, and we sat down, and it wasn't in our house. It was somewhere else. He came in, and he said, well, look, I've heard about your teachings, and I like it. And I saw he's a very enlightened man, a businessman, very educated, and so on. But he said, one thing I cannot accept. I want my freedom to drink alcohol if I want to. Nobody's going to tell me I shouldn't. I know when to stop, and I know I'm an adult and this and that. Now, what am I going to do with him? If I begin to tell him all the bad things about alcohol, he is going for hours to argue with me. When we are going to enter into argument like a football match again, backwards and forwards. He says it and I will say it, and this is no use. But you know, if this man becomes a Baha'i, this would be no problem for him. He'll give it up. Isn't that right? This will be finished. There's no problem. Now for me to try to explain to him the good points and the bad points is very premature. So what I said to him, which was surprising, this lady was surprised. I said, don't worry about alcohol, it can be resolved. Oh, we can resolve this way. Now this man thought I'm saying that we can give him a special dispensation. But you know, it is true, it can be resolved. I said, let us talk about other things, which are fundamental things. You don't have to answer every question which comes to you, and then you involve yourself ahead of time, like this carpenter who involves himself in making a man who doesn't know how to hold a saw in his hand to make it. If somebody comes to you and he wants to know about electricity, you can't tell him what electricity is. You tell him, go to college for so many years, learn mathematics and physics, and then come to me, I'll tell you what electricity is. It's the same thing with the faith. If somebody jumps ahead of you, you have to bring him back to the origins. These are some of the techniques that we have to have in teaching the faith. You have to be wise in teaching the faith. Well, now, friends, I think we are far exceeded our time, huh? And that we will probably come back again this afternoon, maybe. We'll see what will happen. What time it is, Mr. Chairman? 1:30. Oh, you have to eat very fast. This is one thing. Oh, I see. There are a lot of questions in here, and well. Well, I'm beginning to feel a little sad, because I think the time is coming soon that we will be departing. I suppose you're all going tomorrow? Some of you probably will be here, but some of you will be gone. And but it has been a marvelous time. I really have enjoyed every minute of it, I must say, being with the friends. And let us go straight away into the subject we were talking. It was about teaching, if you remember. And I was explaining that one of our problems, I believe, is that in our methods of teaching, that we have to learn. We have to learn, first of all, the difference between these two aspects of presentation of the faith. One is the giving the message and proclamation, and the other is personally teaching and confirming a soul, which is very different thing altogether. Now you see what I meant when I said that if you go into a public meeting and you begin to teach the faith, as we often do at our homes, in firesides, then you could in fact say things which could put people off who are not, you do not know them. You do not know their feelings, their ideas, their backgrounds. And that what we should do is to adapt our talks to their condition by giving them those teachings which are pleasing and which are not controversial, don't open up controversial subjects or theological subjects when you are giving the message, but just really attract them to the cause, attract them to yourself, by giving them something of the teachings which they could leave the room with it and say, that was very nice. But when we're teaching the faith, well, as I mentioned, we have to do things, we have to warm up the person with the love of God. And another thing which is very important in teaching is put yourself out of it, really. Let us not bring ourselves into it. The minute you bring ourselves into it, then this becomes a barrier. We must always, whenever you teach the faith, you must never go alone. And this is one of the very basic principles. Never go alone to teach. Always bring with you Baha'u'llah. And this will enable us to then win the hearts. But Baha'u'llah, it's not always easy to bring Baha'u'llah with us. I want to also mention that. He does not come with us unless we let him. We must let him to come with us. And this you might be surprised to hear this. We must let him to come with us. He cannot come otherwise. You know, you see a generator of electricity, a generator. The generator is pouring its energies in the network, in the wires, pouring it. But not until you connect up your light and your instruments to it, will it ever enter into it. It will not be able to energize it unless you let it, unless you open the way, unless you switch it on, unless you connect it to it. It is not the function of the generator to connect something to itself. If you leave a lamp beside the generator for 100 years, the generator cannot say, well, this is really pity, this lamp is sitting beside me, I better connect it to myself. This is not its function. We have to connect it. As soon as you connect it, the energies will come. And it's the same thing with Baha'u'llah. Baha'u'llah cannot come to us unless we open the way for him. This is a very basic principle. He says, love me that I may love thee. You see? Love me that I may love thee. If thou lovest me not, my love can in no wise reach thee. Know this, O servant. This is exact words of Baha'u'llah. Love me that I may love thee. If thou lovest me not, my love can in no wise reach thee. He doesn't say, if you don't love me, I don't love you. He says, if you don't love me, my love cannot reach you. If you have not switched on the light, he's telling us, the power cannot come through it. It's very simple. And so here is where we have to allow Baha'u'llah to come with us in all our activities, in all our services. No matter what it is we do, anything that a Baha'i does, if it wants to bring results and fruits, whether it is typing a letter, whether it is building a house for the faith, whether it is making a cup of tea in the kitchen, not until we are able to attract the power of Baha'u'llah to ourselves can it ever be effective. Now I have no idea how long we can talk together, but I hope sometime we can talk about this, drawing from the power of Baha'u'llah. But if there is chance, we might talk about it. If there is not, you can read the writings. And when you read the writings, the answers are there. And the only thing I would like to mention here is this, that no Baha'i can be successful in anything he's doing unless and until he has Baha'u'llah with him. And as I said, he cannot come to us just like this. We have to prepare the way for him. One has to read the writings in the morning and in the evening, you know. One has to say the obligatory prayers. One has to read the history of the faith, the history of his revelation. One has to draw closer to him. And then one has to serve the faith. Very important thing that we talked about it this morning. And one has to live the life so that he can come to us. But one thing that I must say here now, and this is important, and please don't forget this point. This is a very important point. God, I mentioned the first day, is very forgiving. We must not think, oh, I can't do it, I have to do all these things, I have to read the writings, I have to say the prayers, I have to teach the faith, and if I don't do that, nothing will happen. I think the writings, you can read it yourself. You take one little step forward in the right direction in any of these things, and God will come to you 1,000 yards forward. Once your heart is pure, and once your intentions is pure, then that is a beginning. And we must never become feeling frustrated, because Baha'u'llah looks upon our hearts, not upon your actions. This is another thing you must remember. He mentions himself, he says, how many are people who have been fasting day and night? He says, how many are people who have never fasted, and that God accept them as if they have fasted? Everything depends upon our motives and upon our intentions. And once the heart is pure, the distance between you and Baha'u'llah then is very short. Once the heart is pure, there is no distance. And someone was saying before we broke up for lunch, and I think I want to clarify this point. When we talked about we have to teach the faith every day. True. And this person thought that you must tell about the faith every day to somebody. No. You might go for a month every day out and you won't find anybody to teach. But the very fact that your motive is to teach, that is acceptable to God. You go out with the intention of teaching. You make the effort. Maybe for a month you're looking at a person who is your neighbor every month, every day, and you pray for him. That is steps in the right direction. We must not become rigidly thinking in that way that you must talk about the faith to someone today. If you don't know it, you have failed. On the contrary, once the heart is moved that you want to do something for Baha'u'llah, and you want to give an hour for him, and you go out, and even if like that woman who went there every day, sat there, said nothing. Now that was marvelous. That she did her work. And I think we should do the same thing. That the heart must be right, the motive must be right. Abdul Baha in one of his talks has said that if a person has, say for instance, a person is very poor, but his heart wants and begs God to give him money so that he could build a house of worship. He says, oh God, I love to build a house of worship. If I had money, I would pay all the costs of building a house of worship for God. Abdul Baha says, this poor man, even if he doesn't get the money to build a house of worship, God will accept from him as if he has built a house of worship, because his intentions are pure. This is what God goes by. And then he says, should he ever, God give him the money and build a house of worship? Well, that's very meritorious. Now imagine, he builds it. But there is a possibility, he said, that God will not accept it from him as much as in the former case. Because he might one day say, I built this. And then that's finished. You bring I into it, it'll be finished. Really and truly. There is no room for I in the faith. Remember this also. The faith does not harbor egotistical personality. It is, and this is why the authority is left in the hands of institutions of the faith. The elected institutions of the faith have the authority. The local assembly has an authority to decide, to make a decision. No one else has the right to make a decision or to give. Now I can mention this to you in here, for example, that we have, as you know, in the faith, two types of institutions, the elected and the appointed institutions. The authority is with the elected institutions of the faith. The other institutions of the faith, which is that of the counselors and the board members and so forth, and the assistants, they have no authority. They have a sacred function, but no authority. The authority lists with the institutions of the faith, and that we all will obey that authority. So you see, individuals are cut off here. And this is one of the blessings which enables us all to vie with each other in servitude. Abdul Baha says that it is not possible to serve God because God is exalted above our service. He says if you want to serve God, you will have to serve the friends of God, the beloved of God, the friends, the believers. And this is, I think, this is why Abdul Baha says, this is the thing which I feel is the most beautiful thing he has said for all of us as a guide, as a lesson. He says, make me as a dust in the pathway of thy loved ones. And the loved ones of God is the person who may not have any knowledge, may not have any understanding of the faith as much as you have or I have, but he is the loved ones of God. Just the believer who says, I believe, and he or she becomes a Baha'i and throws herself into the cause of God. And as I said this morning, we look into each other's faces and we see a beautiful sign of Baha'u'llah, and that is the loved ones of God. So friends, these points that are very important in teaching. Now, I'm not going to talk much more about teaching and how to teach the faith and how important it is. You all know this. But I would say that if you wanted to forget everything that I have said this weekend, you can forget all of these things that I have said. Remember one thing. No, remember two things. Or three things, huh? 2 or 3 things. 4 things. One thing is, remember this. We must always draw nearer to Baha'u'llah, closer to him. Bring him with us in everything we do. Turn to him with a pure heart. And if we can't do it, I think the first step to it is to read the writings in the morning and in the evening. And then serve the faith. Just don't read it and sit there, but then serve, then go out, then do something. Give an hour to Baha'u'llah. And then things will change. Things will change. So, talking about teaching again, I wanted to mention another aspect. Teaching, so you can see the difference which exists between teaching and proclamation of the faith, which are really for different purposes. The proclamation of the faith is designed to bring the faith into the notice of the public and give it prestige. Teaching is to confirm people. Personal teaching is to confirm people for the purpose of confirmation. Although both of them help people to recognize Baha'u'llah, but to carry them out, they are two different functions. And so where is the place for teaching? Let us find out. Where is the place for teaching for a believer? The place for teaching is in your hometown, because that's where you can make friends. If you want to proclaim the faith, well, you might travel around. You can go here and there, but you cannot teach there really. If you want to teach, you have to spend time to make friends with your workmates, with your neighbors, with your fellow beings, human beings in the town, that you come in touch with them. And so, the place to teach the faith is in your own town. But unfortunately, again, there is another, misconception, if you like to say, that some people I know in Europe think that if they want to teach the faith, they have to leave their town and go to another town, and they call it travel teaching. Now, it's all right. Don't take it that I'm saying against travel teaching. It's really, in travel teaching, you can do something. You can help the believers in that locality. You can go there into the streets in that town and tell the people and give the message to the people. You can give the message. In travel teaching, you can give the message of Baha'u'llah to people. But it is not easy to teach them, because you don't know them. You're not having a home there to attract them to yourself. Also, you must remember, it's possible, of course, it's possible that you come across a person straightforward. You must also remember this, who is so open, who wants to know about the faith. There you don't have to wait to make friends with him. He's already friends with you. He says, tell me about the faith. I want to know about it. Then you invite him to your home. And then you don't rush into telling him everything. Just find out what he believes in. Let him say it. This is very important. Let him say things. Baha'u'llah once said that, look at the master. He is an example, he said. When somebody comes to him, the master first listens to him. And he listens with such genuine interest that the person thinks that the Abdul Baha is learning from him an awful lot. And he says he lets him say a lot of things. And at the end of it, he then says something to him in a way that the person realizes that he is not trying to argue with him. Because if a person knows that you are trying to establish in a conversation the ascendancy of your argument, if he ever thinks that you are trying to establish that you are right, and he says something and you say, no, it's like this, and he keeps on saying something and you keep on, as I said, it's like a football match, then this becomes an argument. Then there is a barrier already. Baha'u'llah says we must not build barriers when we are teaching the faith. If ever the person thinks that you want to establish the fact that you are right, then he is going to have a psychological barrier there. He won't come to hear you. And even whatever you say, it goes over his head. He's not responsive. And he says, look at the master. He listens. He listens with such genuine care, and then when his turn comes, he just says one or two little things in such a way that the person becomes affected by it. And he says, yes, this is a different point of view. And he does not rebel against it. There is no barriers. I have seen that in some gatherings when people are teaching, I've seen many people who are in firesides or public meetings, they teach the faith. And all they're interested to do, quite frankly, now I'm not criticizing anybody, but I think I've seen this, that all they're trying to do is to pour out their knowledge and impress the person with all the things they know and all the terminologies they know to use, you know. And they pour out so much from beginning to the end, it speaks about an hour maybe, or two, pouring out every knowledge he has. Well, this is, I think, not going to impress people. People will take it, may go home, and they may not come to you. But to attract somebody is when you give him the message with the spirit of humility. Very important, with the spirit of humility. Again, remember, when Baha'u'llah is with you, you can do it. But if you're alone, you can't do it. If you don't take Baha'u'llah with you, then you are going to become yourself and project yourself and your knowledge and all the rest of it. But when he is with you, one becomes very humble. Now, teaching is very important, and time is very short for us, really. I mention this because the world conditions will make it imperative for us that we should now really go out and teach. Now, I believe that if every Baha'i takes to heart this suggestion that I made in here to you, that 1 hour a day you give to Baha'u'llah, in your own ways, devise your own ways. And personal teaching need not be done alone. You can do 2 or 3 of you can gang together and teach. Really. Because often when you are 2 or 3 together, you can help. Somebody can open his home, somebody can make a cup of tea, somebody can talk, work together. But there is no need to organize yourself through committees. But just go 2 or 3 people together and do this personal teaching. And I know that in this community, in your country, people are very open. They are not like Europeans, who are so closed, reserved, who are having so many traditions that they must observe. This nation is very free. And you have some beautiful natives here, which I say, I'm sorry I haven't been able to see them. I would have loved to see the natives, and I've seen 1 or 2 people here. And to me, they have a tremendous station in the faith. They are the people who have been under pressure and oppression, and the faith is going to bring them up into the open and give them, they are like little flowers which have been growing in the shade. Now the sun of Baha'u'llah is going to shine on them and make them very beautiful people. And you have this crowd amongst yourselves. And I believe that if all of us together determined to give 1, 2, 3 hours a day to Baha'u'llah for teaching actively, go out, and if nothing happens, come home again. You've done your job. Just like that woman. And then put your trust. Another thing you can do, you can test Baha'u'llah. Try him. See what he'll do to you. Really, put him on the spot. Put him on the spot. Baha'u'llah says, if you arise, I will assist you. Take his word on its face value. I have seen some people who have done this, and they come back and they said it works. Shoghi Effendi says, let those who doubt, let them try. Well, you try this. Bring Baha'u'llah with you. Do all the little things we said, or not the little things, but the important things. Those points that I've been talking since yesterday. Put them into practice for a while, and then do this. And the whole community will begin to become a new force. And I know that you are very blessed to have here marvelous institution of the counselors, a marvelous person who is here working with you, and the board members who also are the embodiments of really detachment and love for you all. And what I've heard, they're so loved by the friends that you have got everything to your advantage. When I said time is very short, I'll tell you a story here to just remind you of it. This is a Persian story again. And in order to tell you the story, I have to first bring you up to some ideas that you may not be familiar with. In Islam, it is said that on the Day of Judgment, they are going to have a big bridge set up. God will establish a huge bridge, long bridge, which is 70,000 miles or something long. And they say it is sharper than the sword, and it is hotter than fire, and it is thinner than a hair, and you have to walk on this. Why would you like that? And if you ever fall, if you've had it, you go down. You see, the fires will consume you right away. But if you could go the 70,000 miles on a journey like this, which is as sharp as the sword, as hot as the fire, and as thin as the hair, then you're all right. And they say that everyone must pass through this when the day comes. Well, the story begins in here that there was a man who was a holy man. And he was a marvelous person, and he used to teach the faith and live the life in accordance with the teachings of Islam. But next door to him was a man who was really the opposite. He was a man of vices and full of vices. And in Islam, it is a commandment that every individual must tell, if you are a good man, you must help the bad man to live a good life. You have a right to go and tell him, why do you live like this? Come and live like me, for instance. Well, of course, this is forbidden in the faith, you know that. It's a good thing, otherwise we would be talking to each other quite a lot. Now, this man one night had a dream. This holy man had a dream one night. He dreamt that the day of judgment had come, and this huge, long bridge was set, and people were being questioned, and then they put on this bridge, and they had to go. And this man, of course, being a holy man and have lived his life all in accordance with the teachings of God, he had no trouble. He said, I went on this bridge like anything, just like walking in the big highway. For him, there was nothing. He went on. And he found this is great. Oh, it's a marvelous thing. I've lived a good life now. I'm now getting the results. And I go on this bridge so easily, no problem. Suddenly, as he was going along, he saw somebody pull the back of his coat to stop him. And of course, you know what happens if on such a bridge so thin, if somebody pushes you a little bit, you're going to fall down. He looked back. He said, what are you doing to me? Who are you? And he saw it was his neighbor. You know, that bad neighbor, that bad man. He said, why do you do this to me? He said, where are you going? Oh, he said, I'm going to heaven. I've lived a good life. Oh, he said, that's what you think. I am not letting you go to heaven. Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you help me when you were my neighbor? Do you think I'm going to let you there? Oh, no. And he pulled him down, and the two of them went down, and the fires consumed them. That was the end of him. And he woke up. And he woke up and he realized the significance of this dream. And middle of night, he woke up his wife, and he said, this is what I've dreamed. I should have helped this man next door to me. I should have taught him the faith and helped him. And so he put on his coat and his clothes in the middle of night to go and tell him. His wife said, why are you doing it now? Just wait till tomorrow morning. He said, how do I know I'm going to live till tomorrow morning? I have no time. I must tell him. Now, I think this is really a very good story for us. And someone described hell being in the next life, when all our friends come to us and they tell us, why didn't you tell me? That will be hell. And I feel that this is true. We must really arise and tell everyone who comes across, anyone we see, we must give him giving him the message and attracting him and gradually teaching him the faith. We must not be in the habit of wanting things to happen instantly. You see, we are so much living in a world of instant things, instant coffee, instant potatoes, instant things. You press the button and things, of course in America here it's like this, is it? You press the button and things will happen for you. Now, you cannot have instant Baha'is. You have to teach them, you have to spend time with them. That's why Abdul Baha says at least one person in a year you can bring into the faith. I remember, I'll tell you one story here, and just to give you an idea of how one teaches the faith with great wisdom. You have to use wisdom here. Now in Ireland, where we live, people are really devoted to Christianity. They are marvelous, marvelous people who have religion in their hearts, and they are attached to religions. They're mostly Catholics. Beautiful people. And they live such a life. You remember yesterday I was telling you the story of the chandeliers, the beautiful crystal lamp hanging. They are there. They are not lighted, but they are there. And once they become Baha'is, they become marvelous Baha'is. Now, they are very attached to their faith. And you have to know how to teach them. You have to know how to teach them. If you suddenly go to them, have you heard of the Baha'i faith? Do you want me to tell you about the Baha'i faith? He runs away like as fast as you can think. He wouldn't want to hear it because he thinks this is something wrong. And this is very natural. You have to gradually cultivate them. We had a neighbor a few houses away, and my wife was very fond of her. And we were very fond of this woman. And we really began to pray for her. We thought this would be lovely if she becomes a Baha'i. But she was a very staunch Catholic. Her family were priests and so forth. Very staunch. So the first thing to do if you want to teach him is never tell him anything about the faith. You just pray for him. And embrace him in your love, in your heart. And we did this. We had some children, and she had some children, and the children were playing together. And this woman would come to our house and see some Baha'i articles, and she knew we were Baha'is. She would never dare to ask a question. She was telling us, I was frightened to say a word. Never. And for maybe 6 months or a year perhaps, not a mention was made of anything to do with the faith. We certainly weren't going to do it, but we knew that one day she's going to do something. And she was so agitated, she was telling us, she was agitating in her heart. Many a time she had come to ask us something, and she was frightened. And then she didn't. Now you won't know these things unless you are a staunch Roman Catholic. Beautiful people, beautiful. So one day, after a long time, she brought herself to the point of asking my wife, how do you teach your children? What is the principles that you teach your children with? She wanted to know. Bringing up children. Well, that's a good subject. And we knew that if she ever, we had talked about it together, and my wife knew this, that if she ever asks a question, we are not going to answer her in the first time. So my wife said, oh yes, well, sometime I'll tell you. It's very important. You see, this is the wisdom of handling these people. If we just suddenly go to him and, oh gosh, yes, I'll tell you all about it, he's gone. No, we'll tell you about it. Very casual. And after about a month or so, we knew she's going to bring it up again. And it came up eventually that, oh, well, what about that thing you were going to tell me? Oh, yes, I forgot about it. All right. And so eventually she talked to him a little bit, not about the faith so much, but about the principles of child education as Baha'is we know it. And then she said that she was frightened after that. She told us. She wouldn't come and ask us anymore, and we knew this would happen. She wouldn't come near us again for a good while. But then she couldn't help it again. And eventually, I'll make it very short for you, she came and she asked this time about the faith. And there again we knew we are not going to tell her right away. Oh no, well my wife said, oh yes, well I'll tell you sometime. Sometime I'll tell you about it. And then when the next time came, and after a while, all we gave her was a prayer book. Just give her a prayer book. That's the best thing you can give to a Roman Catholic as an introduction to the faith. And she said that when she got this prayer book and she read some of the prayers, she couldn't sleep that night. And then she hid the prayer book away from her sight. You see, this is a very good thing that's happening. The forces are entering within her and the reactions are building up. Obviously, it's being affected already. And we knew that this will happen. And gradually, she comes forward. And she came and she asked, and then my wife told her about the faith in greater detail, gradually and gently, and gave her to read some of the writings. And so she almost was a Baha'i. And then I'll tell you something that you must know, that, in teaching the faith, Shoghi Effendi mentions that. You read The Advent of Divine Justice. He tells us, he makes us to understand that it is not wise always. Now this is not, mind you, a universal law, but it is very helpful in many cases, that when you're teaching the faith to somebody, you must teach him, yourself and your friends. That's all right, bring your friends to help. But you don't have necessarily to show him to the Baha'i community, because the Baha'i community may have some Baha'is in them who, by virtue, say for instance in this country or in America, I don't know what it is, I hear there's a lot of race prejudices in America, isn't it right? I hear that. Well, supposing you have a man, you are teaching him and he's white, and he's coming close to the faith, or somehow you're teaching him the faith and say, now let's go and see the Baha'i community. And then he sees all of them sitting there, they are all colored. Well, he's going to run away because he has prejudices. He's not a Baha'i yet. You see now? The prejudices that he has not yet gone. So we must not give them tests, unnecessary tests. And this is why Shoghi Effendi says that when you teach the faith, you have to teach it with wisdom. You have to be sure who is going to be the right person to meet with that person, because he's in his early stages. And so this lady had reached the point that she said, now I want to come to one of your meetings to hear about it. And she said, if I could be the one who would be speaking. So I said, all right, well, if she wants me to speak, let us arrange a meeting in some Irish friend's home and invite 2 or 3 Baha'is, and then I'll go and we can talk. So the night was set. And half an hour before we were due to leave to go to this house, because by then we have moved our residence from there, the host telephoned and said, the house is full of people and a lot of Persians and others have come. They have heard that I was going, and the whole house is full. Now I knew this is bad for this lady. If she now comes up and sees this Baha'i community the way we are, consisting of so many different backgrounds, she's going to probably go through a great unnecessary tests. So I'll tell you what I did. I had an excuse not to go that night, and we canceled the meeting. We arranged it some other night. These things are hints that we should bear in mind. These are because people have prejudices. They are not ready. Of course, now she's a marvelous Baha'i, beautiful Baha'i. And all these stages are past. You see, in England, for instance, there is a great deal of class distinction. In here, you don't have probably class distinction. You have color distinction. And the class prejudice is such a subtle thing. We have no English people amongst us, have we? I can say some things about them, can I? The English people, all you have to do is to talk. Just talk. Or sometimes even my wife says there is no need to talk. You look at them and you know which class he belongs to. The way he looks, the way he sits, the way he looks at you. But as soon as he talks, definitely you know which class he belongs to. And then there is a barrier between the two. The barrier is so subtle that it doesn't show it. It's very polite and smiling at each other, but it's underneath, you can see through the smile, you can see a lot of barriers there right away. This is a great deal of prejudice there in that way. Now I remember we had a marvelous Baha'i teacher, Kathleen Hornell. She's passed away, a beautiful person, Lady Hornell. She was a titled woman. And Lady Hornell was a great wise teacher of the faith. And she had some people she was teaching in her home. But she never mixed up her contacts. The people she was teaching, she did not mix them up. She mixed them up in accordance with her class, shall we say. She was teaching a lady of high class, of a high society, very, very distinguished lady. And then she was teaching some of the laborers, dockers. She never let them see each other until they became Baha'i. I remember one day I was there, and this lady was there, and Lady Hornell was there, and I was there, and some others were there, and we were talking about the faith. And this lady she was teaching, Elizabeth Greaves, if any of you have ever heard her name, she was a marvelous woman. She's passed away. She became a beautiful Baha'i. She belonged to a higher society. Now, that night was her night. Tomorrow night was the night of the others. And I was sitting in the room, and I suddenly saw behind the window walking John, who was one of the dockers, you know. And he had decided tonight he had nothing to do, and he thought, although it wasn't his night, but he thought he'll come tonight and drop in and see what Lady Hornell is doing. Well, as soon as I said to Lady Hornell, John is coming here, she got up and went to the door and said to John, she said, John, I'm very busy tonight. Would you mind to come tomorrow night? You don't mind, do you? Now you see, how many of us would think that way? Wisdom. And it was wise. If Elizabeth had seen others, this is going to be a Baha'i? Is this a Baha'i? And am I going to be a Baha'i? She has got still all the prejudices in her mind. She's not a Baha'i yet, to get rid of the prejudices. And this is why I feel there are many things. You should read The Advent of Divine Justice, really. This is a letter that Shoghi Effendi particularly wrote to the American Baha'is. After he gave us the 7-year plan to the American believers, he wrote The Advent of Divine Justice. Now, if you read that book, it gives you all the prerequisites for teaching. Keep on learning and deepening in it. And now that I'm talking about deepening, let me talk a little bit about deepening, because it's a very important subject. I didn't mean to talk about this, but let us talk about a little bit about deepening. Deepening often is taken to mean that you must attend classes and learn and read. But often deepening, this is one form of deepening, which is not bad, and it may help to read, but I think the real deepening comes, the fruit of deepening, the sign of deepening is when your love for Baha'u'llah increases. If you go to a study class and when you come out of it, if you find that your love is increasing, then you have deepened in the faith. But if you find only your knowledge has increased, then we must bring a balance in here. The balance is not right. Because the real deepening comes to us when we understand. In Arabic, there are 2 words which are very clear words, and they mean 2 different things. One is called ilm, which is knowledge, translated into knowledge. The other one is irfan. Irfan is very difficult to translate it into one word. It means understanding. Sometimes Shoghi Effendi has translated it as understanding. But it is really more than understanding. You can't just bring it in one word. It is knowledge. Irfan is knowledge, plus which results in understanding, recognition, penetration of your thoughts into mysteries. All these things together makes it irfan. Let us use the word in Arabic as it is, or understanding. Either we can call it understanding or Arabic. Now the thing to do, the thing to learn, and knowledge is something that you acquire. You learn knowledge by reading and by studying things. And then your mind will store it, like a computer. And anytime you want it, it comes out again, back to you. And some people are very good at it. They have good memories. They act like as good computers. They learn from this and learn from that and learn from the other, and they add them together. They act like an encyclopedia sometimes. Well, it is good. Knowledge is very important, and we must have this. But really, it is not essential, in a sense, when you're comparing it with irfan. The goal of life is to acquire irfan. Irfan, let us call it understanding. And in order to acquire irfan, Baha'u'llah has told us what we should do. And I'm going to tell you exactly in a few minutes. But let me first say that there may be people who know a great deal about the faith. They have the knowledge of the faith. There may be great scholars of the faith. They may write books about the faith. They may know anything you ask them, he'll tell you where it is and where to find it. But this is not it's not as great. It's not a great thing as great as having irfan. They are acting like encyclopedias, like a computer, something which has accumulated all this knowledge. And as Baha'u'llah says, they usually steal it from one another, and they pride themselves in it. We have had many such people in the faith, or we have them probably, I don't know, scholars who write books, who say things, they know things. But the man who has irfan, he may not be even educated. But you ask him anything, and it comes out of his heart. It wells out of the heart. The knowledge wells out of the heart of man. The knowledge of God wells out of the heart, just like a spring. Baha'u'llah has confirmed the Islamic saying that knowledge is a light which God throws in your heart. Baha'u'llah confirms this. He talks about it in the Kitab-i-Iqan. Knowledge is a light which God casts in your heart. What a strange place for knowledge. Because often when you say this to people, people say, well, the heart is not a place for knowledge. It's the mind which is a place for knowledge. And it is true. But how can the knowledge of God be cast in the heart of man? And this is what is the difference between knowledge, ilm, and irfan. Irfan, which is the recognition, which is the understanding, comes to the heart of man, and then the mind will pick it up and understand it. But it dawns in your heart, because Baha'u'llah says, your heart is the place, is my home. I'm paraphrasing it. He says, your heart is where I will come into it. He will not come into your mind, he'll come into your heart first. Heart is a place of love and warmth. We have two focal points in our bodies. One is our mind, which is the center of intellect, which is very important center. We are not trying to underestimate it or undervalue it. And the other focal point is the heart of man, which is a center of love and warmth. And Baha'u'llah says that God always comes to your heart. He says, this is my home. And many a times he says in the hidden words and other tablets, he says, many a times I came to your heart, my home. I found there was a stranger in it. And then I left. And do you know who that stranger is? Ourself. Attachment to the things of this world. The most formidable form of that attachment is our own self. Attachment to our own self. The love of oneself, the ego. So, he says, I came many a time and you were not there, or the heart was full of the strangers. And then I left and I went. So you see, the knowledge of God comes into our hearts. And then the mind will pick it up and will understand it. Now this is what we should aim for as Baha'is, for deepening. That our hearts may become the recipient of the knowledge of God. Whether we have education or not, it doesn't matter. Whether we have knowledge or not, it doesn't matter. And Baha'u'llah tells us what should we do that we may acquire this quality of irfan, understanding. If you want to know what he has said, read the opening chapter, the opening passage of the Kitab-i-Iqan. He says, no man No man shall attain, I'm paraphrasing his word, no man shall attain unto the shores of the sea of the sea of understanding. He uses the word erfan, which is translated into understanding. It's that word he has used. No one will ever acquire to understanding, the shores of the ocean of understanding, unless and until. Now, if you learn, Baha'u'llah doesn't say that. He says, no man shall ever attain the ocean of the knowledge of understanding, of the ocean of understanding, the shores of the ocean of understanding, unless he be detached from all that is in heaven and on earth. You see the condition he has put down for it? And detachment, we talked about it this morning, what it means. If you are in love with Baha'u'llah, your heart will become opened, and then anything you want to know is there. Believe it. Believe me, I've seen the early believers who were illiterates. And this is the history of our faith. And their understanding of the faith was so deep. It gushes out of their heart. You have seen two types of learned people, if you like to call it. One who had knowledge, oh yes, great learned men, and they come along and give talks to you and discuss a lot of things and theories and all sorts of ideas and books and writers and everything you like. And then there is a man who may be illiterate, who has got this great understanding of the faith. Now, the other man may not have understood the faith. He has the knowledge of the faith, but he have not necessarily understood the faith. And this is why some of them leave the faith after becoming scholars. We have had so many scholars who have left the faith because he doesn't understand the faith. To understand the faith, we have to really go closer to Baha'u'llah. To the extent that you go nearer to him and closer to him, and this means you become detached, then your heart becomes the dawning place of the knowledge of God. Somebody came to me a few years ago and he said that I have been a Baha'i for 10 years and I have read many things. I have accepted everything Baha'u'llah has said, but he said one thing I cannot accept, and he told me one of the writings of Baha'u'llah. He said, I can never accept that. And he said, I've asked many people to explain to me the wisdom of this, but nobody has been able to explain it to me. Can you tell me what is the wisdom of this? Because he said, I can never accept that. Well, here it is now, a problem. I said to him, have you ever thought you might be wrong? He said, no, really not. Now, you know, we have to be humble here. If you want to approach the cause, the revelation of God, you have to be humble. And I said, well, not until you are ready to accept that you may be wrong. And I said, now, of course, you believe in this. You can't say you are wrong, but at least you must be prepared to say that you are wrong. You may be wrong. You cannot understand this. You will never understand this. This, you are a believer. You believe in Baha'u'llah. There is no question about it. You know he's a manifestation of God, and you know that man makes a mistake. Well, the only thing to do is to submit and say, I don't understand this. I may be wrong. I am wrong. I accept. Without recognizing it, without knowing it, you accept it. And do you know what happens? Once you accept it and you submit yourself, then one day, it may be tomorrow, it may be the next month, it may be the 10 years from now, suddenly it will flash into your mind and into your heart the wisdom of that thing. And nobody can explain it to you, but it will come to you when you read the writings. Suddenly it will penetrate into your heart like an electric bolt. And then you know the wisdom of it. But not until you submit. As long as you say, oh no, I don't accept that, it will never come. So you see, friends, studying and deepening in the faith is a spiritual experience. And we have to aim for that, so that our hearts become the repository of the knowledge of God. And so, as I said, I have seen many people who were illiterates, who did not have or did not have much of a knowledge, but who had such an understanding of the faith. Every time you ask them a question, even if they had never heard of that question, never heard of it in the writings, never knew what the answer was, The answer would come, and when you look into the writings, you could see this is exactly what Baha'u'llah or Abdul Baha have said. This is a true deepening. And I feel we should aim for this more and more, all of us. Do not become, do not feel inferior to all these people who come to you. And I'm not in any way trying to value the value of people who are learned or who have knowledge. But don't be frightened of them. Really. You have Baha'u'llah, and he will come and teach you a lot of things that these people themselves don't know it. You may come across people who go to universities years after years, and I'm not in any way saying it's bad to go to universities, but they come and they talk to you about the faith, and you might be feeling inferior. Don't feel inferior. The faith is for all of us. Baha'u'llah is for everybody. The humblest person. And it is you who can know much more than he does. But of course, how wonderful it would be if knowledge and understanding are together. Oh, this is beautiful now. And this is this is like the chandeliers, which is perfect in itself. Crystal, lovely, beautiful, exquisite lamp. But it is also lighted, you see. A person who has knowledge and understanding, has ilm and irfan, means knowledge and understanding. This is perfect. It's like Mirza Abul Fazl, the great Baha'i scholar we have. He had both knowledge and understanding. And this is, of course, the aim. We must learn knowledge, we must acquire knowledge, but we must also turn to Baha'u'llah so that in humility, so that he may give us this gift of understanding. Well, now that we have talked about this, let me now enter into another subject. I hope I'm not making you tired, huh? Soon we will have a break, don't worry. Whenever the chairman walks down the steps, we know the time has come. I think that the other thing I wanted to bring up the subject is, you remember we said there are two major work we have to do. One is that of teaching the cause, which is the most important thing which we have been talking about up to now. The other thing is the building of the institutions of the faith. The institutions of the faith, which we are building now, the local assemblies and the national assemblies, these are the instruments for the future of mankind, the institutions for the future of mankind. We may not realize this yet ourselves, because we are so much in the early days of the faith, and these institutions are so weak, that we may not ever think probably that, oh, this local spiritual assembly one day is going to become the house of justice for this town. A house of justice, who knows? Maybe it will become something like the government of the house, of this town. But whatever it is, hello, oh, beautiful little boy, very nice. These local spiritual assemblies one day become houses of justice for mankind, for the people of this town. And we may not realize this, but at this moment that we are talking about, we are entering into a very critical age, critical time in the history of mankind. A time which we talked about again this morning is filled with perils and with dangers and with sufferings, with tribulations, calamities. And the only thing which mankind will have when the world is really has tasted the agony of this whole calamities which has to come, are these institutions we are building. There is nothing else which will be left, which mankind can really have turned to, which would save it. And even now as we stand here, if it wasn't for the institutions of the faith, for the new life which Baha'u'llah has breathed into the world of man, the world would not be together. The world is keeping together today because of the existence of these institutions. It's because of the house of justice that the world is now exists the way it is and can exist. It's because of our institutions of local and national assemblies that our communities can exist. Really. And it is the only refuge, Shoghi Effendi mentions, of a tottering civilization. And we must believe in these things. We are not building these assemblies for fun. There's no fun in that. And we are not working, we are not serving on these local assemblies for fun either. Because it's a difficult job to really really go into the local assemblies and to act as the way we should. It's a very difficult job. Needs a lot of perseverance and labor. So you see, not until we realize the significance of these institutions. Now, I have used this example before, and I'm going to use it again. It's not a bad example, perhaps. Some of you may have heard this. And that is an example from nature of what we have been going through, what we will be going through. I'm going to use an example of nature. In nature, if you look at an egg is a perfect food for you until it is fertilized and a new life begins to grow in that egg. Once the egg is fertilized and the chicken begins to grow in that egg, the food becomes corrupt, becomes rotten. You can't eat it anymore, and the balance is gone inside. A new situation has arisen in that egg, within that egg. And what happens is this, that this little life begins to grow inside, surrounded by all this rotten material. And this rotten material becomes its food. And as the more this chicken grows inside the egg, the more rotten becomes the egg. These two are very related together. Until such time that these two can never again, the situation cannot last. The balance is gone. And then there would be an explosion. The egg breaks. And then a new life appears. It's born. And what has happened to the egg and all the things in it, it's all gone. The only thing which is left behind is a broken shell. You see, this is law of life. And once the egg is fertilized, nobody can stop that process. Nobody can say, all right, now it has been fertilized and the chicken is beginning to grow, but we can stop it. You can't. Once this process starts, nobody can stop it. The same principle, it's not an example, it's a principle of life. You remember yesterday I was saying how nature teaches us a lot of things and we can learn a lot of things. One of the lessons is this thing, is this story of the egg. Now, exactly the same thing has happened with the coming of Baha'u'llah. When he came, he fertilized the egg of human society when he declared his mission. And from that moment onwards, the seed of the Baha'i community was planted. See? And from that time, from that moment onwards, the world began to deteriorate in its conditions, and they became unstable. And the corruption set in. And the destruction set in. But it is gradual. At first nobody could feel it. First nobody will feel it. At first when the chicken is just, when the egg is fertilized, you wouldn't see any difference. But gradually, but the process has begun. And as time goes on, as the faith grows, as the institutions of the faith grow, as the Baha'i community grows, along with it, the world conditions will deteriorate. And the Baha'i community, like this little chicken, is surrounded by this corrupt world. We are surrounded by it and we are immersing in it and we are swimming inside it. But there is a distinction between the two. And then this condition cannot last very long. Baha'u'llah says suddenly that will happen which will cause the limbs of mankind to quake. Time comes that this egg has to open up. And once it opens up, what is safe and sound and the only thing which really is worth talking about is the birth of the institutions of the faith. It will be born. People can see it. Now it does not mean that when this happens that the faith can run the world for us. Oh no. When a child is born, it cannot do anything. It cannot run around, it cannot rule the town, it cannot do anything. It has to be years to grow, to nourish, to be nourished, to grow, to then in the future when it grows up it can take over all the things. And it's the same thing with the faith. The institutions of the faith, when this happens, when this egg breaks up, when the world situation comes to a head, and that which Baha'u'llah says, referring to it as the limbs of mankind quaking, and Shoghi Effendi calls it the calamities. When that happens, all that will happen is that the institutions of the faith will show themselves to the world. They will emerge. It's like a mother who is pregnant. Nobody can see the child. You go outside into the world and talk to the people about the institutions of the faith, what we are building, local assemblies, they are the foundations of the future society. They think you are a little bit, well, they don't understand this. But when, not until that child is born, not until it's born can people see, and then they realize what we are talking about. Now it is this that Baha'u'llah talks about it. When he says, then and only then will the divine standards be unfurled. After this calamity, after the suffering. He says, then and only then mankind can see. Then and only then they can see what these institutions that we are building are doing for mankind. And it is then that they'll turn to us in great numbers. Shoghi Effendi says these local assemblies must act and will act as beacons of light at the time of greatest peril. When the ship is drowning, the best thing for it is a beacon of light. And so we have to have these beacons of light now, preparing for a time that when the time comes that these beacons will be shining. To be switched on, not switched off. So you see the significance of these institutions that we are building, and how important it is that we should build more institutions. I don't know how it is in this country, but I can tell you in some countries that I am familiar with, for instance in Ireland, again I must constantly talk about Ireland, I live there anyhow. If there are 10 Baha'is in a town, we call it luxury. 9 is enough. We have to build up institutions of the faith. And one of them is going to say, now they're going to look at each other and say, these 10, and say, which one of us is going to be? But one of them will go. We really have very few local assemblies, which is more than 9. There are 2 or 3, and they're usually the capitals, or usually some people have the excuse, and they're right. Their husband is non-Baha'i, the wife is non-Baha'i. I was told by the chairman of the National Assembly there that 90% of the Baha'is of Ireland have once in their life at least pioneered, and some several times, to these local communities. 90%. Now I don't know how many people you are in here, but I think you could make quite a few assemblies. And it all need not go long distances. You can go 10 miles out of your town and form an assembly, form a community there. These institutions, the more we have them, the more beacons of light for mankind. And this is why the House of Justice wants us to increase these institutions. And we will make more institutions. So you see the significance of the local spiritual assemblies. I wonder if we should close in 5 or 10 minutes, 3:15. Is it all right, Mr. Chairman? Right. Now I'm going to tell you, we're talking about local spiritual assemblies now, and I know what the local spiritual assemblies are, some of them that I'm familiar with. Again, I don't know what you people are like, what your assemblies are like. Maybe you are perfect. But some local assemblies are not perfect. And the friends feel, oh well, a local assembly is very weak. They become disheartened. For instance, there may be a local assembly that there are 9 people, but only 6 of them are really coming regularly. Oh, the other, and this is very disheartening. And they say, well, what's the use of this? What can we do about this? And then they tell them to make more of these. This is the problem. This is the problem. You see, you have got this weak local assembly, and they tell you to make more of them. Now, I will talk about this after this session a little bit about this. But let me give you a story of a weak local assembly, because you may have never seen a weak local assembly. I will explain to you what it is like, just to give you an example of it. And then we close. And then when we come back, I want to describe the real significance of these institutions. I'll give you a story, because I have been once, years ago, we had a local spiritual assembly in Dublin. Now that must be about 30 years ago. And in those days the faith was in its early stages, very, very early. Our famous Mr. Townsend, he was a member of the assembly, I was a member of the assembly, and then we had some others. I'll just give you an idea of what our assembly was like. You might be maybe amused by it. Well, now, and I am saying these things very bravely, because all these people who were members of this assembly, they're all gone to the next world. They're not going to hear me. They're not going to hear me. And if they hear me, they can't. You remember yesterday I was saying how the souls in the next life cannot influence us in a bad way? They can't be angry at me. On the contrary, they're going to shower their blessing upon us. Yes, they're all gone. Most of them are gone. Now, you remember we had this assembly, and then we had, there were some Persian believers in it who knew not one word of English. They had come out from Persia, and they had not been familiar to any of these standards in the Western world. It was so strange to them. They did not know one word of English. And they were insisting that anything which is said in the local assembly, they must know what it was. And I had to translate it for them, every word. Now they would say, it's no use just to tell us the gist of it, or the briefly, but you have to tell us word by word so that we can understand this man when he's talking. That's a difficult job, And if I ever wouldn't do it, they would quote verse and chapter for me that you must do it, So this was one of the things we had to have. Then we had a lady who was suffering from Parkinson's disease. And whenever she came to the meetings, we had to be very quiet, and she was shaking, and we often had to make her lie down. You see? And then we had a gentleman who was stone deaf, wouldn't hear a thing. And I remember my job was to, first of all, when the discussions began, I had to translate it into English, into Persian for the friends. And then I had to always sit beside our beautiful, wonderful Mr. Jones, who was deaf, and shout into his ears what we have been saying, you see? Now imagine, this is an institution which is going to govern the whole of mankind in the future. Now how can we, if we lose the vision of it, then you will deteriorate into a very low condition. But you must always keep the vision that this is the source of God's kingdom on earth, you see. And Mr. Jones, I had to shout at him all the time. And the minute you shouted, Doris would say, "Oh, why do you shout so much?" I remember one day we were sitting there, and we were discussing subject, and somebody made a suggestion saying, when we hold these public meetings in these hotels, we used to have a public meeting in a hotel. He said, well, let us give a cup of tea to everybody. It's nice. At the end of the meeting, we'll give them a cup of tea. So I translated this for our friends. They say to give a cup of tea. They said, fine, we agree with this. Then I turned to our friend. They say that in the hotel you should give them a cup of tea every time that the friends come. He said, I've had a cup of tea at home, not now. You see? So I said, no, not in here, not in here. Oh, he said, you're not giving us a cup of tea every time you did. So having finished this, I said, no, Mr. Jones agrees. We should have a cup of tea. To the Persians. Oh, no, but he said, you have been talking to him a long time. You must tell us what he was saying. All the details of it we want to hear. You were talking to him for a long time. Now, friends, this is the basis of our institutions. This is how our institutions are functioning. You see the weakness now? You could look, if you look at it from the outside world, it is very funny and it is very insignificant. But you know, these institutions now have given birth, have matured, have given birth to a national assembly in that country. We have a national assembly. We have now 30 local assemblies, both in the north and the south of Ireland. Now the conditions have changed enormously. But in those days, it was the weakness of the institutions. It was part of the growth of the institutions. Because the faith has an organic growth. It doesn't grow up like a machine. You don't mold it into a shape and say, there it is. It's an organic. And when you first put the seed down into the ground, you go and see that seed. You go and unearth it. Just open up the earth and see what has happened to the seed. It's rotten. It rots under the ground. And when you look at it, you say, oh, this rotten. What is it going to do? But it has life. And it will grow. And it will produce a tree. And I think this is the way we should look upon our institutions. And then all these weaknesses will be overlooked. Friends, let us go and have what are we going to do, Mr. Chairman? We will probably have a photograph, or I would love to have a photograph, yes. It would be beautiful to remind us. If you, are you really tired, do you think, you people? No? If you are, you can lie down. You are already eating, some of you, I can see. You might just as well. Yes, well, let some others come in now. They are coming in. Encouraging to look at you all eating and drinking. It's a great thing to look at it, you know. And all I've got in here is a little bit of old water. Well, friends, we were, in the previous session, we were talking about the weakness of our institutions today and how this weakness often clouds the issue for us of the greatness of the institutions of the faith. We think, oh, well, we may look upon it as a weak institution, and therefore we will not be able to appreciate the power and the glory and the greatness with which these are invested. Now, I wanted to go a little further here and talk about this a little bit more, because it's very important that we understand the nature of our institutions. The nature of our institutions are embryonic. We are dealing with embryonic institutions of the faith. They are not the institutions which are now able to govern mankind. They are embryonic in the same way that the child in the womb of the mother has life, but it cannot do anything at this stage. It has a great future. These institutions of the local spiritual assemblies become houses of justice in the future. But now they can't become houses of justice. Now, in order to explain this point, I would like to draw your attention to the institutions of the outside world. The institutions which you will find mankind has built up for itself. There are many institutions, religious institutions, there are political institutions, social institutions, all over the world. But these institutions are all man-made, and there is no life in them. No life, really. You look at any of these old world institutions, there is no life. They work like machines. Machines have no life. If you look at a machine, it has no life. But for a machine to work, All parts of that machine must work in perfection. Isn't that right? If you're having a machine, you cannot have a machine which it will not work unless everything is perfect. This is a fact. We know this. One little thing goes wrong in that machine, the whole thing will stop. So the emphasis is on perfection. But there is no life in it. Now you compare that machine with a child of 3 years of age and see the difference. Our institutions are like that child. You compare the outside institutions, which are like machines, and they have to work in perfection. Every part has to work in perfection. Now you compare that with a child of 2 or 3 years of age. You will find the child has no perfection. You see the difference now? It has no perfection, but it has life. And it has the promise of the future. This is the difference. Our institutions are like this. They are in the state of infancy. They are not perfect. They make a lot of mistakes, both local and national institutions of the faith. But they have life in them, and they have the promise of the future. You know, when you have a child which is very young and he comes into the room, we have none of them in here, by the way. We have got some beautiful children sitting who are much grown up, but I mean smaller than these children. If they come into the room, they are going to disturb a lot of things. They could disturb a lot of things. A small child could pull things up and break up things and draw lines on the walls for you and all kinds of things they do. But the parents are not worried about this. Why is it that the parents are not worried about all the imperfections of their child and all the wrong things he does? Because they know in the future he's not going to do it. That's all. They know when he grows up he's not going to do it. That's not why they're not worried about it. This is exactly the way we are. This is exactly the way the House of Justice is dealing with the local and the national spiritual assemblies of today. And the same way the Guardian did before them. They are not worried about all the mistakes we make at all. And you know, we make a lot of mistakes in our institutions because they are not infallible. I was talking to somebody in the House of Justice, a member of the House of Justice, and he was telling me, he said, nearly we come across maybe with 20 or 30 mistakes that the National Assembly has done, some very serious mistakes. But we don't bring it to their notice. We let them grow out of it. They have to grow out of it. Maybe if there is one of them out of this 20 or 30, which is fundamental point, we will bring up to their notice. You will be surprised to hear how many mistakes and wrong things and wrong attitudes that we have in our institutions, which are overlooked completely. They are not brought us to our attention. In the same way that a father or a mother would not and cannot, in fact, expect his child to act like a mature person. Can you do that? Can you ever do your child to behave like a grown-up person? If you do it, you're going to destroy him. But you must let him make all the mistakes and pull all the things together and push all the things down and break things up. And he grows and grows out of it himself. If everything that he does which is wrong, really it's by our standards, by the adult standards, everything that he does really in the house is wrong. Now if we try to correct him, punish him right, left and center, the minute he does a move, you just change it, he's going to become a nervous wreck. He will not grow. Whereas you have to let it do all these things and it'll grow out of it. But if he does something fundamentally wrong, oh yes, if he's going to burn his finger, you just pull him back. But other than that, you will put up with all the wrong and the difficulties that happens in the home with the child, because you know in the future he's not going to do it. This is exactly what the House of Justice today is doing to us. They know we make all the mistakes and all the weaknesses we have. Oh, so many things. And yet, they don't draw to our attention. So you see, the faith has an organic growth. The institutions of the faith have an organic growth. And so our job at this time, when we look upon our local spiritual assemblies, is to love them and to cherish them, in spite of all these weaknesses that they have, in the same way that the parents love and cherish their children, in spite of all the wrong little things that they do. And not until we acquire this consciousness and recognize that these institutions belong to Baha'u'llah, that they have the future. Their future is great. In the future they are not going to make these mistakes. And if they ever did, they will be held responsible by other institutions, by higher institutions. But you can't hold responsible a child for a lot of wrong things he's doing. You see, you give a nice suit of clothes to a child and you let him out into the garden, he comes back rolled in mud. You can't keep him responsible. You don't blame him. That's the child. But when an adult, if you give him to an adult, a 21-year-old man goes out and rolls in mud, he's in trouble. He has to answer for it. But that time has not yet come. And so we are to deal with our institutions with the greatest love. We have to cherish them, we have to obey them, yes. And even they make wrong decisions. Abdul Baha has said that you obey them and the right things will come out. And I have seen this happening over and over again. And sometimes it may be very difficult for us to obey them because we know they have made a wrong mistake, wrong decision in your heart of hearts. But we don't criticize them. It is forbidden to criticize the actions of the local spiritual assembly publicly. Oh, you can criticize them. The only way you can criticize these institutions is to write to them. If you have a criticism of any local assembly, you write to that local assembly and openly tell them what you think of it. Now, it is the duty of the local assembly then to pay attention to it and give you an answer and discuss it. Now, if you are not satisfied with their answer, you don't disobey them. You still obey them. But you write, but this time you turn to the National Assembly. And even if you don't like the decision of the National Assembly, you still obey them. But then you can turn to the House of Justice and say, well, I don't agree with this. But you see, we have all the freedom of criticizing. But once you did that, once you wrote a letter, and or you went and saw them personally, that's finished. The minute you talk it over with a 10th person, with another person, then that is a serious breaking of one of the very sacred laws of the faith. You can't go on and criticize a local assembly by writing to them your views and then going out into the public and constantly saying, oh, you know, I think this assembly is doing this and this assembly is going to do that. This is against the faith. And the same thing is with the National Assembly. If you find that you are not happy with what the National Assembly does, you can criticize them in writing, but we cannot go out and criticize them in front of each other. But we have to obey them. But I know these things don't happen in here, probably. I'm sure of this. But I think that what we have to do, and this is a very vital thing, is that we have to cherish them and love them. Your National Assembly, for example, is a body that all the believers must rally around. You must pray for them. We must help them in your prayers, in your thoughts, and we must obey them, obey that institution, because it belongs to Baha'u'llah. It's the institution of Baha'u'llah's institutions. And we must never allow that institutions to be humiliated by any outside body or force. Well, I'm lost here. I don't know where to turn and what to say because time is limiting us. I think this conference is finishing, as far as I can see it, today, in a sense, because so many of you are going to go. And
could you say a word about meditation and possibly distinguished from study learning?
Well, I'll make a note of it in here because there are so many points that the friends have asked in here, and I maybe talk about all of these things. I feel that the best thing for me would be, maybe now, to turn to your questions and see whether we can at least end up this. And if those of you who come tomorrow, we could all together begin with a different subject. So let us perhaps see what we have here now and try to deal with some of the questions. Is that acceptable to you? Now, what I have said so far about teaching and this afternoon, if you have any questions that you even want to ask now, I can make a note of them in here, and then we'll see how we can fit them in. Anybody else has any questions? Yes?
I don't know if this would be feasible, but I wonder if tomorrow, when it'll be kind of a news.
Well, maybe. I'll make it. We'll see. We will see. Yes?
I'd like to be able to understand better how those of us, I mean all of us that possess an ego and utilize that ego, how with the ego we fight the ego.
Oh. Yeah. I feel that, yes, there's another question in here. You know, I think this question of ego, you were here when I was telling you the story of the drop on the ocean? Oh, this is why. Yes, you see, the story of the drop on the ocean is this. I'll repeat it for you. This is the story of a little drop of rain, they say, was falling down from sky, from the clouds. And it was very proud of itself because it realized that it was the water of life. And water of life is very, very precious. It's the most precious thing in this creation. And so that drop of rain was very proud of itself as it was coming down, until it suddenly saw the ocean beneath it. And when it saw the ocean, it saw its own insignificance, and it shouted and it said, if this exists, then what am I? Up to then he hadn't seen the ocean, you see. And when it said this, the ocean attracted it to itself and made it part of the ocean, became a part of the ocean. Now this story is very apt in here. We are all like that drop of rain, and the self is that call, is that voice within us, which you call it ego, which is proud of itself. Not until we see the greatness of the revelation of Baha'u'llah that I was talking about yesterday again. And that is a very important key. Not until we see that. Now again, if you were not here yesterday, maybe sometime you can refer to some of these tapes. We talked about this. Or those of you who will be tomorrow, maybe I can read for you some passages which you can see what a tremendous revelation this is. Not until you see that great ocean and recognize it, we will not become humble. Humility, true humility really comes then when you see yourself as utter nothingness. Then the self will go into the background. Yes?
Well, yeah, I only brought it up as something that maybe we can go into tomorrow.
Yeah, good. Okay, well, I think this is, to me, this is the answer I have. We must, not until we recognize the greatness of this revelation and turn to Him, we turn to Him with a feeling of awe and wonder, can we recognize our own impotence. And then the self will disappear, or will not completely. We cannot destroy the self. We must not destroy the ego. If the ego is there, you cannot destroy it as long as we live here. I was mentioning, well, I don't think we better go into that now. Take us further and further. Any other questions that you have? Very good.
There's one up there with this lady in there.
Yes, please, shout about it.
How many tablets of Ahmad is there? And
What's this? How many what?
tablets of Ahmad?
How many?
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
And also in the tablets of Ahmad, where it says, "Be as a flame of fire to my enemies,
Hmm.
and a river of life to my beloved."
Mm.
I'm like to hear that.
Well, you said how many tablets of Ahmad there are, isn't it the first question, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, there are several tablets which are written for people called Ahmad, but they were different people. You see now? There is one particular which is very famous. That's what you say. There is another one which is also famous, and Shoghi Effendi has translated parts of it in the gleanings, parts of it. Although his name does not appear as Ahmad in that particular part, but that's another tablet. And there are other tablets which are written for other people called Ahmad. So it's not easy to say how many tablets of Ahmad there are. There may be several, depending on the number of people whom Baha'u'llah had written to different Ahmads. Ahmad is a very common name. But there are two which are very famous and well known amongst the believers. One is the one we always read and call it the Tablet of Ahmad, and most believers are familiar with it. The other one is an Ahmad who was very different type of a person altogether than the other one. One was the embodiment of purity and sanctity, and the other one was the opposite. And Baha'u'llah wrote to both of them. The one that we read, of course, is that Ahmad who really was so detached from the things of this world that Baha'u'llah has given him such a great station. Now, when you say that Baha'u'llah has said that be as a flame of fire to my enemies and a river of life eternal to my loved ones, well, it is not necessarily meaning that when you see the enemies you have to burn them up and destroy them. This is not what is meant. It's really meant, you see, a fire always in the writings. A fire is an instrument by which you can tear up and burn the veils which come between man and God. In the long obligatory prayer you can say, make my prayer a fire that can burn away the barriers between me and God. So that when Baha'u'llah says that you should be as a flame of fire to my enemies, in one sense, you could say it means that you should burn their veils of ignorance. Fire also warms up the hearts of people, That's another thing, to warm them up. So that there are various tablets of Baha'u'llah in which he has in fact used these symbols very clearly. He has said in some tablets, for example, Baha'u'llah says to a person, he says, be as a flame of fire, and with it warm up the hearts of people. So from these words you can deduce that it's not meant that you should become fierce with people. In fact, in one of his tablets, Baha'u'llah has made it very clear that we should never interpret anything in his writings into that state of fierceness and rising up against other people. He has mentioned that, and I think quoted it in his third volume of the Revelation of Baha'u'llah when we are describing the fire tablet. Baha'u'llah says, do not use those passages which I have used in the fire tablet as a pretext to rise up and to destroy people's lives or otherwise to become an aggressive person. He says, these passages we have revealed in order to indicate the sufferings which have been inflicted upon him. And that he says in this dispensation, we must be always loving people, even our enemies. This is the teachings of God, and it will never be changed. It is the eternal teaching of God. If that was what was in your mind, perhaps this may be the answer to it. All right? Yes?
I have a crucial question.
A crucial question we can't answer.
To myself.
Oh.
The tablet of Ahmad and the fire tablet, are those three, this is in relation to prayer on the one hand and reading the writings on the other. Are those, if you say those are reading the writings or praying,
we cannot really here draw, there is nothing hard and, there is nothing absolutely hard and fast rule that you can say this is one and that's the other. There are many prayers which are like tablets. There are many tablets which are like prayers, half of them. So that we, again, remember, everything depends on your intentions and your heart. I can assure you that if every morning you read the prayers and thinking these are the writings, that will be acceptable to God. Of course it will be. God is very, very forgiving. And He looks at your motives more than anything else. But I think this, you can't draw a line between it, and I think that both of them are correct.
In the volume here, 3, given about the parsons and all that, there's similar names, something like Bull Rum, tobacco. Both of them start with capital D, and I think the two backwards, on the right-hand side, are slightly different. Law, tablets are laws. But anyway, what is the expression, the two D, one or the other, mean?
I didn't exactly follow what you were saying, sorry. Anything else? Yes?
You mentioned somewhere along the line that there were some things that are counter to creation, or
That what?
Counter, that run counter to the creative force of God. You might say unforgivable.
Oh.
That keep our souls from progress.
Well, no. All I said was that one of them is what Baha'u'llah refers, what Christ refers to it is sin against the Holy Ghost, which is to us Baha'is is the covenant breaking. Now that you mentioned that, I think it's not a bad idea if I talk to you a little bit about the covenant. Huh? You see, I mentioned yesterday a little bit about this, and now before I go there, I want to put your mind at ease. Somebody has written me a letter here called Carlos. I don't know who it is. Carlos, you are the one. Now, I wonder whether we should discuss this thing with you later on, because this is all about the obligatory prayer, isn't it? And if there is time, by all means, we can discuss it. But it's something that you and I can talk about it, asking some meanings of this and that. And the other person is called McGrath. It's you. Now, will you be here tomorrow? Will you be here tomorrow? Okay. Well, I'm just saying, in case we couldn't deal with it today, at least we can leave it. And there is another person. And there is another person who has written, his name is Thank You. Now, and this is about process of the lesser peace. Now, I'm just wondering whether that person will be here tomorrow.
No, but I can tape it. It's my wife.
Oh. You will be here tomorrow? Huh?
Yes.
You will be? Oh, good. Well, then I like always to put the questions away. And that's how we did it. Right, successfully. Now we can talk. Oh, you are coming, yes?
Yes. Daniel.
Yes? Yeah, what is the part?
It says here, the tablet of the will.
Yes.
But you recognize a similar expression with different meaning of different tablets.
No.
Okay, well, forget that one. The question is, in the index, you fail to translate the Jaliyah.
Oh. I didn't translate it, no? Well, that's my problem. Fault. Effulgences. I'm glad I'm not infallible, you know. We make a lot of mistakes. That's a great relief, actually, when you know that you are not infallible. I find it very good. And it's a great relief. And that's one of the bounties of God, really, that He has made us not infallible. And that we make all these. Well, friends, I think it's not a bad idea if we talk about the covenant. But before I talk about the covenant, there's one subject that maybe we can talk about it now, and that is to close the materials that we have been discussing so far about reading, saying the prayers, reading the writings, teaching the faith, and we said how important it is, and as we go do these things, our faith will grow. And I mentioned that we must not become rigid in anything in life. We should not become rigid. These are the basic principles that we have to observe. But you know, if you didn't today, you will do it tomorrow. Don't be worried about it. Although tomorrow may never come, that's another thing. But and don't keep me responsible now and said that you told us not to do it today. And but all I'm saying is this, that we must become very much assured of God's bounties which will come to us if we take a little step towards teaching and towards reading. God will help us enormously. And I mentioned that you could examine, you could test these things. You could test Baha'u'llah and see how much he will change our lives. I've heard many friends have come to us and told us the same thing, that since they have been putting these things into practice, that they have been reading the writings religiously. I told you like the story of the Irish girl I mentioned to you yesterday in Paris. Do you remember? Now, these people are so much out of the problems of this world. That all the problems are no longer on their shoulders. They just feel a new person. They feel relieved of all things because their reliance is on Baha'u'llah. Although they may go through a great deal of suffering, but they know that this is a marvelous thing, and they endure it, and they love it, and they grow in the faith. So that all these points that I mentioned yesterday, the reading of the writings, the saying of the obligatory prayers, the living of the life, the teaching the cause, and the pioneering and making more local assemblies, really, these are the basic works which will help us to grow, and our faith will grow. But then there are dangers. Now, I'm going to mention some dangers for you here. Dangers. You know, if you possess a very nice thing, there are thieves who are ready to take it from you. If you have a beautiful treasure, there are thieves. There are some very dangerous robbers, highway robbers, who can rob it of you. Now that I'm talking of highway robbers, I remembered of a story which might be a good thing to hear it. Highway robbering. Do you know what highway robbering is? You have never been involved in it. Highway robbering is something which happened in the East very much. And when I was young, we used to go through it all the time. When you travel from one town to another, there are long, big deserts around. And these deserts, there are certain areas that armed men are there, bandits you call them, and they attack caravans and people who are traveling, and they will take all their things from them, everything they have. I think you had them in America years ago. You've forgotten the practice, huh? Nowadays, you don't do this, but in the old days, they used to do that. Now, in these highway robbers, there was a highway robber who somebody talked to him about the faith, and this is not a made-up story, really, and he became a Baha'i. But in those days, there were no local assemblies to help us. He just taught him the faith. He accepted Baha'u'llah and became a believer. But he continued in his work as a highway robber, you know. He was really sincerely, he was doing his job very well. He understood certain teachings, of course. And he also heard that in the faith there was no clergy, there were no priests. You know, this is one thing he heard. There was no priests in the faith. And he was very happy about that there were no priests. Because after a year, when he met this Baha'i and he told him, how are you doing? He said, he said, my business is going on very well. In fact, it's much better than last year. Because he said, when I was a Muslim, I would never rob a clergyman, but now I do. Now this man later on really became a true Baha'i, and then he lived the life completely different, I can tell you that. We all change, you know. Yes, we were talking about highway robbers who robs you of everything. Now in the faith also, in our lives, there are very dangerous robbers for every one of us in our lives, which we have to be very careful. Once you become a Baha'i, and once you grow in the faith, and once you do all these things we mentioned, you have to be constantly watching. And it's a constant watching in the same way that you, I don't know what you do here, but in our countries we have burglar alarms and all kinds of things to protect us from this. Now there are I'm going to mention three very dangerous robbers of faith, who rob our faith away from us. The first one who robs it, and is the very dangerous one, is our own self. Again, an ego that we were talking about. That is the most dangerous thing, which can constantly direct us towards the animal world, the animal nature. I was mentioning the other day to some of the friends who were assembled here, it's like an aircraft. We are like a human, the human being is like an aircraft. We have two things. One is the dead weight. You see, the aircraft has a dead weight, which means that dead weight that drags it down all the time. All the time it's ready to drag it down, to drop it. It is the weight, gravity. And then it has the engines which are pulling it up. Now, the minute the engines are stopped, immediately the dead weight will pull the aircraft down, and it will not wait and say, all right, I'll give you 3 minutes. No, immediately it pull it down. So that, you see, the engines is our faith. And it must be always revved up. It must always be operating, always be on. If you are not on our guard, this dead weight, which is the animal nature in man, you know, we have two natures, the animal nature, which we call it self, that is going to pull us down. And so the only thing which will stop it is our faith, which can pull it up. And it's very easy to immediately the force of gravity, but for the engines to pull it up, it takes a long time, and it needs an awful lot of energy and time and effort. And this is one of the greatest robbers we have of our faith. The other robber, which is just as dangerous, is bad company. Bad company. Baha'u'llah has told us that we must associate with the godly, with the people, and eschew fellowship, he says. These are his own words. Eschew fellowship with the ungodly. Now, the ungodly does not mean a person who doesn't believe in God. Remember that. Oh, no. The ungodly is a person who comes between you and Baha'u'llah, and who says to you, well, look, you are a Baha'i, okay, but let us go and do this, let us go and do that. Directs you to do things against the teachings of the faith. I've seen many people who become Baha'is, young people especially. The young people are more targets for this, much more than the older ones, in schools, in colleges, in society. I've seen some young people who come into the faith with great joy and excitement, and after a month you hear, where are they? Oh, well, this boy had a friend and is involved with a friend, and that's it. He's gone. The friend has pulled him the other way. The ungodly does not mean a person who doesn't believe in God, is agnostic or atheist. The ungodly may be a person who confesses in a very religion in a very sincere way. But a person who is an agnostic and an atheist may not be an ungodly person. He may be a very good person. And in fact, most of them are very honest people, very good. Most people who become agnostics or atheists, I think they're very honest people. They find that religion has been so misrepresented and so distorted in their ways by those who confess to have a religion that they have just said, we don't want this. This is very honest. So, this is the second dangerous thing that could rob us of our faith, really. We have seen amongst the young people, so many young people who have been destroyed, completely gone away because of this bad company, completely destroyed. People who were brought up even as Baha'is. And then the bad company, they got in contact with so many bad associates, and then they took them away. And the other one, finally, the third one, another thing which I'm sure doesn't happen in America, it's gossip. Really, backbiting. This is something which is, we must always talk good of the people. Always talk good of the people. Talking with people. Somebody said, when do we draw the line? We can always talk about people, but when can we say it is backbiting? You know, sometimes you talk about people. When does it become backbiting? I thought, I said to him, when you begin to enjoy it, it becomes backbiting. You know. Really, that's what happens. These three things, I think, are just enough for us to concentrate on these points and try to guard ourselves against this. We must always talk good of the people. Beautiful. Every Baha'i is so beautiful, because the power of faith is working within that person. Because as I said this morning, well, we are related to Baha'u'llah. I am only related to him by name. That's all I can say. But that's a tremendous honor, tremendous. Well, now, having said this, let us go a little bit to the subject of the covenant. I wanted to mention maybe about half an hour here and talk about covenant. Again, yesterday we touched upon this. I mentioned that Baha'u'llah brought for us a great ocean of his revelation, a real ocean. In the dispensations of the past, the manifestations of the past, they brought also the Word of God. But in relation to what Baha'u'llah has brought in this day, it was not an ocean. It was a small pond, you might say. But they brought the water of life. Every one of the prophets of God who have come, they bring with them the water of life. And that water of life, when they are alive, when the manifestations of God are alive and they are with man and they are walking with man and talking with man, that water of life is fresh. It's like rain. You know, the word of God is like the coming of rain. When the rain comes, you become refreshed by it directly. You know, it comes to you and hits you directly. You become refreshed by it directly. But when the rain stops, when the manifestation of God is no longer with us, that water is accumulated then in a pond. And that's where you get your water of life. But he is no longer there to rain upon you. He's gone. Christ was here for 3 years. Muhammad was for 23 years. And what he left behind was the Quran, for instance, which became like the pond from which all the people could go and receive this water of life. In Christianity, we have the Gospels, which is the repository of the words of Christ. And it is like a pond of water to which people, the saints and scholars of Christianity, went to it. They took this water of life and they took it away and distributed it and gave this water of life to everyone. This is how other religions grew. In this dispensation, Baha'u'llah has brought an ocean for us, really an ocean. But in the past, when the Prophet passed away, he left this water of life free to people to use it the way they wanted it. Which meant that everybody was free. If you have a pond of water in your house and hundreds of people are at it, what will happen to that water of life? To that water? It will become adulterated because everybody pushes his pots and pans in it and washes things into it, and after a while that water loses its purity. It's adulterated. This is what happened to older religions. The founder of the faith brought the water of life, but he left it freely to his followers. He said, "Yes, this is for you." And the followers really so much adulterated it. They added things to it, to the Word of God. They took away things from the Word of God. They interpreted the Word of God the ways. They pulled it into pieces the way they did it. And so they created sects and divisions. They adulterated it. And now we look at these religions, there are hundreds of sects. It's because man has had the freedom to use this. Now Baha'u'llah has done entirely a new thing altogether, which the prophets of the past had not done. Now why they didn't do it now, this is an important point. You must not think that the prophets of the past did not know. Baha'u'llah, as you know, has given us a covenant, firm covenant. He has put a wall around this great ocean. And he said nobody has the right to touch it. Nobody has the right to interpret it. The other manifestations of God didn't do this. You mustn't say, oh, well, they didn't do it because they didn't know. This is far from the truth. The reason they didn't do it was because mankind in those days were not mature enough to be held responsible. Because once you have a covenant, you will have to be responsible. In the same way that I was giving you the example of a child rolling in mud, coming back with his new suit of clothes. He rolls in mud and he comes home. Well, he's not to be held responsible. Only when he grows up, you can give him responsibility. You give him a new suit of clothes, he goes back, he goes out. But if he rolls in mud, as I said, he will be in trouble. So you see, mankind had not reached the age of maturity to be able to hold on to the terms of a covenant, which is very disciplinary in its nature. You do not have to interpret the words of God. This is a great discipline. But in the past, they did. And so different religions in the past were divided into sects. And yet those sects grew together. For instance, in Christianity, you will see that in the early days, the Christian faith was divided into 3 or 4 major sects. But each sect grew upon the tree of Christianity. Each one drew its sustenance from it. You couldn't say one of them didn't draw the sustenance from the teaching of Christ. It was like a tree which had several branches. But today, it's different. Very different. There is only one branch. And anyone who deviates is cut off. And when you cut it off, you don't have to fight it. It will dry by itself. Now, in this dispensation, as I said, Baha'u'llah has brought for us an ocean of revelation. But he did not give that revelation to us directly and say, all right, this is my revelation, I brought it for you, I give it to you. He didn't do that. He brought it for us, but he didn't give it to us. I think we mentioned that somehow in passing yesterday, in reference. He didn't give it to us. He gave it instead to the person of Abdul Baha. And Abdul Baha became the container of the revelation of Baha'u'llah. All the forces of the revelation of Baha'u'llah were placed within Abdul Baha, to such an extent that he had the powers of the manifestation. Although he was not a manifestation of God, he had the powers of the manifestation of God. It's like the moon. When you look at the moon, it has light, and it is beautiful light, but it is not of itself. It has not a light of itself. It is reflected upon it. Whereas the sun, like a manifestation of God, has its own light and its own heat. Abdul Baha here is like the moon, which gives light. By virtue of being the container of the revelation of Baha'u'llah, he had all the powers of the manifestation conferred upon him. He knew what was in your heart, just as Baha'u'llah knew. And he had all the powers. And his words, although is not the word of God in that sense, but it has the same validity as the words of Baha'u'llah. In fact, in one sense, his words are more authentic than those of Baha'u'llah. Did you ever think of that? The words of Abdul Baha could be more authentic than the words of Baha'u'llah. For example, if you ever come across a statement that Baha'u'llah has made a statement, say, and Abdul Baha says this, really, he may make his statement completely opposite to it. Which one would you take? The words of Baha'u'llah or the words of Abdul Baha? You don't take the words of Baha'u'llah. You take the words of Abdul Baha because he is the interpreter of the word. So in that sense, his words become more authentic if they seem to be contrary to it, because he is giving us an interpretation which we may not even understand, but it is he who can interpret for us. Yes? Yes, of course. The words of Shoghi Effendi are the same thing, because he is the interpreter of the word of God. But this is very rare that this may happen. It's very rare. But if it has happened, there are some cases. I'll give you an example of it. Baha'u'llah's secretary has written, he said that Bab and Baha'u'llah had met out physically in Tehran. It is in one of the tablets which Mirza Awa Jan, Baha'u'llah's secretary, has written. And you know, Baha'u'llah's secretary did not write anything of himself. Everything that he was written, it was dictated to him, even though it appears in his own, as if it is his own composition. But it was all composed by Baha'u'llah, everything that he has written. Now Abdul Baha says they never met personally, individually. So whose words we take? We take the words of Abdul Baha. You see, this is how we have to understand this. Now, I was saying that Abdul Baha in here becomes the container of the revelation of Baha'u'llah. And yesterday, those of you who were here, I was describing how Baha'u'llah is like the summit of a mountain, and Abdul Baha being a servant that no other human being on this earth can reach him as low as Abdul Baha in servitude. He's the lowest of all in servitude. He's like a valley. Baha'u'llah like the summit of a mountain, and Abdul Baha like a deepest valley. And so when the water pours down from the top of the mountain, it accumulates in the lowest valley. And so all the forces of the revelation of Baha'u'llah are accumulated within the person of Abdul Baha. And then there is another thing you must remember, that the center, if I wanted to put water in this glass, and the water is pure, this glass must be empty. If it is not empty, when I pour water in it, it's going to be adulterated. And Abdul Baha was that empty of his own self. He had no will of himself. He submitted his will to that of Baha'u'llah completely, utterly. And so he was a stainless mirror, as Shoghi Effendi describes him, a stainless mirror which reflected the light of Baha'u'llah in perfection. If the mirror is not stainless, it will not be able to reflect it fully. And so it was a completely empty and pure vessel in which Baha'u'llah poured his revelation within it, the forces of his revelation. And you must not think also that Abdul Baha tried very hard and tried to become a very outstanding person as it was, and emptied himself. In a sense he did, maybe, I don't know. But he was certainly not a human being like you and I. He was created for this purpose by God. It was a gift of Baha'u'llah to mankind. It was a part of the revelation of Baha'u'llah, in the same way that revelation comes from Baha'u'llah and it is from God who sends it to us. Abdul Baha was also a gift of God to mankind. He had the makings of being pure and empty of self. And so he was a perfect exemplar for the teachings. Now, Abdul Baha, during the 29 years of his ministry, he enriched the Baha'i writings, the revelation of Baha'u'llah was enriched by it. He expounded it, he explained it to us, he put it in simple words for us, he guided us, he helped us how to live up to those teachings. And then, of course, as you know, here comes the story of self again, comes up. This ambition, this ego, as I said, is the greatest enemy. There were people who had ego, great ambitions to become leaders. And when Baha'u'llah passed away, and Baha'u'llah told us very clearly in his will and testament, he said, everything I have brought is within Abdul Baha. I'm paraphrasing his words, or paraphrasing the thought even. But this is what he said really. Turn to him for anything you want. Outside him there is nothing. And yet there were some ambitious men who as soon as Baha'u'llah passed away, thought now the field is open for them. And they wanted leadership, just like religious leaders. You know, today we have plenty of them. This shouldn't be a surprise to us. Today the world is full of leaders. Everybody wants to become leaders. So you see how much we have a lot of ambitious men. Now I'm not saying that in government whatever they do is not our problem. They're not worried about that. They are all ambitious. Okay, let them be. And I don't think that it is bad to be ambitious in your work. Why not? You want to be, if you're doing any work, why don't you? We should do it in such a way that we become distinguished. We progress. We go higher up in your work. This is not a bad thing, provided we do it in the right way. And not to try to kill a lot of people on the way, but do it in the right way. A Baha'i who is working, whatever your profession, you must try to perfect it. You must try to be distinguished. If you're an engineer, be a distinguished engineer. If you're a doctor, be a distinguished doctor. If you're an administrator, why not? But we are saying in faith, in the faith of God, there is no room for ambition. And these ambitious men wanted to become leaders. There were so many of them. So many of them. And most of them were outstanding teachers of the faith, who thought this is the opportunity to rise up and break up this faith, like the old days, into sects. And so they began to attack the center of the covenant, like men who come to attack this great wall which Baha'u'llah has placed around this ocean. They wanted to get through to this ocean, but they didn't succeed. And at the same time, I can tell you, it brought so much suffering to the person of Abdul Baha that not until you study the history of that period, and maybe I don't think that history is yet really compiled, of the history of covenant breaking during the time of Abdul Baha, in English anyhow. When you read that history of the covenant breaking and the sufferings which were inflicted upon Abdul Baha, you will not believe it. The things that they did. How much they went, these Abdul Baha's brothers, his family, the family of Baha'u'llah, they all rose up against him. Every one of the members of the family of Baha'u'llah, with the exception of a very few, rose up against Abdul Baha. And then, hand in hand with some very outstanding teachers of the faith for many years, not only misrepresentations, but so many times they plotted to take his life. They did everything to humiliate, to misrepresent, and to dishonor him. All the time. This was going on, the intrigues were going on all the time. Study that. You will find that no human being can ever go through so much opposition and afflictions. And yet Abdul Baha dealt with it personally with loving kindness, but for the community's sake with great firmness. And he said, those who were the breakers of the covenant, those who have arisen to destroy the cause of God, he announced them as covenant breakers, and we do not associate with them. That's all we do not do with the covenant breakers. You do not hate them, you do not fight with them, you do not try to destroy them, but we just do not associate with them. And this is a very important principle. Abdul Baha said it's like a disease, infectious disease, which the doctor will isolate you. I mean, this happens in life. The doctor isolates you if you have an infectious disease. And this is because, he said, if 1,000 healthy people go near that one defected person, that diseased person, they're all going to take this disease. The 1,000. That one person will not become better by associating with 1,000 healthy men, but 1,000 healthy men will become affected by one person who is diseased. You see, this process of covenant breaking, which did not exist in they existed in the past, but that it was not dealt in the past. Nobody had the power, the authority to deal with those who break the covenant. Those who broke the covenant, if there was such a thing as a covenant. In Islam, there was a verbal arrangement or a verbal statement which was made by Muhammad describing who should be the follower of Muhammad, who should be succeeding Muhammad. But his followers divided, and they disagreed, and they divided into two major sects. But they were both growing again. You know, there was no question of cutting anybody off. They were both Muslims of different sects. But in this age, anyone who have risen up against the center of the faith, he is cut off. He's cut off. And I will explain to you this process of covenant breaking and the process of throwing away somebody out of the faith, cutting him off, as I said, like a branch which deviates and you cut it off. And when you cut it off, it drops on the ground. And for a few days it may be green, maybe a little life in it. But eventually it will perish. We don't have to fight them. We don't have to hate them. We don't have to do anything. But we do not associate with them. And the best example, again, to know this is to look at your own human body. The human body is the best example. If you look at the human body, you will find that a healthy person can always withstand any disease or germs or anything which comes from the outside. If you're healthy, you're not going to be affected by it. We always go through these germs and through these things. You always, through all around us, it's full of germs and various things. But you get over it. But if ever you allow poison to enter inside your bloodstream and circulate, that's the end. You can't stand that. It will destroy you right away. And so the body has a system. The body has a machinery. The kidneys, this is the work of the kidneys. They inspected the bloodstream, if you like to call it. And they pick up anything which is poisonous. All the poisonous material are collected from the body, from the bloodstream. They won't let it go through the bloodstream. And at intervals, these impurities are thrown out. Isn't that right? If there was no kidneys, you know what happened to a person? Probably he would die after, I don't know, I'm not a doctor, a few hours. All the poisons is destroying you. That's the end. And so all the impurities are thrown out. And once it is thrown out, you feel healthy. this machinery. The hands of the cause, it's their function. To be vigilant, and if there is anyone who is a poison circulating within the community, they'll throw him out with the help, with the approval of the House of Justice today. In the future, they will devise a different system, perhaps. But there is a machinery. And it does not mean that anybody who opposes the faith in some ways, you throw him out in that way and you call him a covenant breaker. A covenant breaker is a person who opposes the center of the faith actively. For instance, you may find a person who says, look, I am not a Baha'i. I was a Baha'i, but I'm not a Baha'i. Okay, this is not a problem. You will withdraw his name. And in fact, you will love him and you will help him. You will associate with him. Or a person may have broken some laws and his voting rights is removed from him. Still, you can associate with him. There's no problem there. He will one day may come back again into the faith. But a covenant breaker is a person who actively opposes the center of the faith. For instance, he says, I believe in Baha'u'llah, but I don't accept anything that Abdul Baha said and I'm going to oppose it. Or somebody may say, I believe Baha'u'llah and Abdul Baha, as they did, but I will oppose anything that Shoghi Effendi will say. And I am a Baha'i and I'm coming to your 19-day feast and I'm going to oppose everything that Shoghi Effendi has said. I won't let that happen. Or somebody today might say, look, I accept all the writings, but I will not oppose anything that I'll oppose anything that the House of Justice says. I'm coming to your 19-day feast, to your assemblies, to your communities, and I'm going to oppose everything they say. Well, this is the poison which is trying to circulate inside, and this we will not allow to happen. It's like a cancerous disease which happens. Sometime you may go and the doctor says, I must cut your hand off right away. You won't object to that. You will welcome it. You say, all right, cut it off. Why? Because you know that if that cancer is allowed to remain there, it's going to destroy you. This is exactly what covenant breaking is. But fortunately, now we live at a time that we are talking about covenant breaking. Very few of them exist today who are opposing the House of Justice. Very few of them. And they are so, we are not worried about them. We are not doing anything with them. We are just leaving it to themselves. And as I said, we don't hate them. We don't associate with them. If they write me a letter, I will not answer them. I will not read it. I'll throw it away. It's poison.
The covenant breakers have, with every major change, the death of Baha'u'llah and Shoghi Effendi.
Pardon?
The covenant breakers have arisen with every major change, with the death of the central figure. There won't be any more of that. The House of Justice won't die. It'll be the same as that.
I don't know. I don't know. There may well be. There are still some who oppose the House of Justice. I think as long as Shoghi Effendi mentions, he says that in every faith, people arose and divided religions into sects. They violated the covenants. In this age, he says it's the same. People will have violated the covenant, and in fact have violated it much more vigorously than at any other previous dispensation. But he says the difference, and therefore probably this covenant breaking may be there till the end of this dispensation. But he says the distinguishing feature of this faith is that they have not succeeded in bringing division. They have dissipated themselves, and this is the true history of the faith. All of those things, people who rose up against the faith, where are they? Those covenant breakers of Abdul Baha, they are gone and forgotten and finished and part of the history. If you want to go to Akka to find out the grave of Muhammad Ali, who was the arch breaker of the covenant, you won't find it. You don't know where he is, even buried. If you go to those hundreds of people who rose up against Shoghi Effendi amongst his family and others, where are they? They're gone, finished, completely finished, without doing anything to them. They're gone. And today there may well be a few here and there. But one thing which is sure is that the cause of God will not become divided into sects. If you look at the history of other religions, you will find the sects were created immediately after the Prophet was gone. The body of Muhammad wasn't buried yet, that his followers were divided into two major sects and the fighting broke up amongst them right away. In this dispensation, This is why Baha'u'llah says this is a day that shall not be followed by night. Now I will explain to you in another way what covenant breaking is, just on a basis of nature. In nature, what is in nature covenant breaking? Just to explain to you by using the laws of nature. As I said, from nature we learn everything, really. First of all, do you know that, look at nature, you will find always opposite things attract each other. The north pole of a magnet and the south pole of a magnet are opposites. They'll attract to each other. But the two similar poles, they repulse. If you bring two north poles of a magnet together, there is a force of repulsion. Now, this is in nature. And it's the same thing in spiritually. God is one end, but the opposite to it is man, the opposite pole. God is sovereign Lord of all. The opposite to it is servitude, humility. You see, these are two opposite things. And these two things attract each other. God loves to see a servant. He is attracted to a servant. He attracts to himself. But if ever somebody wants to put himself on the same level as God, or when I say God, I mean, say, the manifestation of God, or the center of the covenant, it doesn't matter. If a person wants to put himself on the same level as Baha'u'llah, or put himself on the same level as Abdul Baha, or put himself on the same level as Shoghi Effendi, you know, the same level, there is a force of repulsion. This is covenant breaking. As long as you are a servant, there is no problem. But as soon as you want to bring yourself on the same level, knowing what this is, knowing this is a manifestation of God, having recognized Him, you want to bring yourself on the same level, immediately there is a repulsion. Now we want to know, how do we know we bring ourselves on that same level? How do I know that how can we prove that Muhammad Ali, for instance, brought himself on the same level as Abdul Baha? How do we know that those who oppose Shoghi Effendi brought themselves on the same level of Abdul Baha? How can we say this? Now, there is one test for it. And the test, again, you will find in life. If I challenge you to fight with me, you and I have to be of the same strength, or else I would never dare to come and say, let us fight. You only fight with someone who is your equal or less than you. A child will never come and challenge a grown-up man. Or you and I would never challenge one of these boxers to come and fight with us, because we are not equals with them. If I challenge you to come and, if I challenge you, if I oppose you, it means I bring myself on the same level, at least, because I'm opposing you, I'm challenging you. That is the way you can know it. When Muhammad Ali challenged Abdul Baha, he brought himself on the same level. And this is repulsion. When somebody challenges and opposes Abdul Baha or Shoghi Effendi, he puts himself on the same level. By virtue of opposing him, it is an indication that you consider yourself at least an equal. Otherwise you wouldn't. That is how we know. Once they oppose, this is the criteria. Once they oppose the center of the cause, then this is covenant breaking. And that has to be established, by the way, by the center of the faith. Nobody can proclaim somebody a covenant breaker. Now, why I mentioned the importance of covenant breaking and steadfastness in the covenant is that we must not only look at the history of the faith in the past and all the covenant breakings, that's part of history, which give us a great courage in the faith. It's a great pride for us, a great joy and a pride. We can mention it with pride that so many people rose up against the faith, rose up against Abdul Baha, rose up against Baha'u'llah, rose up from within, rose up against Shoghi Effendi, tried to break the faith into pieces, and they did not succeed. And as Ruhiya Khanum once in one of her talks mentioned, she said, every one of these covenant breakings is a ribbon we wear in this battle. You know, a ribbon that you wear, a medal. Each one of them has proved the invincibility of the covenant of God, that you cannot break it through. Even the most fierce onslaught which had taken place in the faith had not succeeded in breaking through this great ocean. So you see, and now look at what happened at the end. Now I have no time in here to talk to you about this, and it's just coming to an end. But look at what happened when Shoghi Effendi passed away. When Shoghi Effendi passed away, the machinery of the covenant, this wall around this whole, the cause of God, was so strong that even though he had not left a will and testament, and I can tell you we don't want to go into that, the great wisdoms of not writing the will and testament. You must not think that Shoghi Effendi forgot to write a will and testament. The great wisdom. And if he had written a will and testament, I'm not going to go into it, you would see that he could have violated some of the basic principles of our faith. Now, I am not at all prepared to go into this question now, because there is no time. It takes a good while to discuss this. Now we understand this. He could not have written. His hands was tied. And in spite of the fact that there were no will and testament, and in spite of the fact that the Baha'is were not only Persians who spoke the same language or only English, but that they were scattered throughout the length and breadth of this earth, coming from so many diverse backgrounds. And yet the faith of Baha'u'llah remained unshaken. The community remained unshaken. And when one of the hands came up, Mason Remy, and he said, follow me, it was only laughable, the consequences. Where is he? What's happened? It all evaporated into the air. The Baha'i community remained steadfast. It's just like every interval, the impurities were thrown out. That's all that happens. And it was a good thing. All the impurities, like the impurities of the body, which are thrown out every intervals. And even now, you said there are no possibility, you suggested there were no possibilities of covenant breaking. Well, there may be. There are always ambitious men. And somebody may come and say, well, now let us see what, they may oppose the House of Justice. I don't know. There are already some who are doing it. Very few. You can count them with the fingers of your hand throughout the Baha'i world, really. Now, this is a stage that we have reached, and we have to be grateful to those souls who defended the covenant of God, who defended this cause. As I said, they rallied around Abdul Baha and Shoghi Effendi. There was a time that Shoghi Effendi, not one member of his family remained faithful. Not one member of the family of Abdul Baha, they all rose up against him. And you might ask yourself, why is it that the person now this is the last thing I'm going to say, and we close this meeting because it's getting late. The last thing I'm going to say to you. Often people may ask themselves this question, how is it that of all the people who should rise up against Abdul Baha were his closest people, his family, his friends, his brothers, why should be that all the family of the master should rise up against Shoghi Effendi? They were the closest to him. You would expect that they wouldn't rise up against him. Now you see, this is a very significant thing to ask. Now the only way I can describe it to you is this, that if you were going to see a great scientist, say you and I were going to see a great, celebrated scientist. Say for instance, if Einstein was alive, we were all going to see him. Let's go and see him. Now either you know mathematics or you don't when you go and see Einstein or someone like him. You either know mathematics or you don't. If you know mathematics, when you go there and you sit down and you listen, you see him on the blackboard working with his theories and all the formulas he has worked out, and you see the way he has come out with such genius way he has proposed his theories. You will be so carried away into the world of mathematics and physics that you consider him as the greatest man And you come out of the room so excited that if anybody asks you what was he wearing, you don't know. What would it look like even, you may not know, because you are carried away with his theories. But if you didn't know mathematics, and you looked at what he's saying, and especially if you're sitting in the front row, now some of the people who are sitting in the front row have seen a lot of things. They would say, look at this man, look at his... You won't understand what he's saying, but you can look at him very clearly because you're sitting very close to him. You would say, oh gosh, look at this fellow. Why they make such a fuss of him? You see now, because you don't know mathematics. And so when you come out, you find a lot of faults with him. This was not he was talking nonsense, and I didn't understand it, and he was having you see all his personal side. Now this is exactly what happens with the manifestation of God. And those who are near him, his relations and his family are very close to him. They are sitting like the front row. And they have no spiritual qualities. You can be sure of this. No spiritual qualities. The only sign of spiritual qualities is if they are servants, if they are servitude. Like Abdul Baha, who I told you would never enter into the room of Baha'u'llah without prostrating himself at his feet and considering himself as utter nothingness. Now, if you're not like that, you don't know mathematics in that example. Now, he knew it. He had seen nothing but the greatness of Baha'u'llah. But these people who had nothing at all, no spiritual qualities, but full of ambition, they had no share of the spiritual powers which was within him. And this is why Baha'u'llah says how many the people who have been in his presence, who hadn't seen him at all, and how many people who were never in his presence, and they had understood and recognized his greatness and glory. These people were sitting very close, and so all they saw was a human being. They saw him, he has to eat, he has to sleep. If he gets tired, if he doesn't sleep tonight, he gets sick. It's just like everybody else. And because they had not seen the great glory which was within him, therefore they were the first to rise up. You see now how it is when you're very close? They always say that when you are close to a lamp, there is a shadow near the lamp. You know these lamps which have a stand, if you look at it, there is a shadow there. The light goes around. You're close to it. When you're close to the manifestation of God, tests are very great. The slightest impurities, the slightest condition of ambition will destroy the soul. But we must thank God in this day that we have none of these problems, although we have to really deepen ourselves in the knowledge of the covenant. And I wish there was time that one could talk about the covenant. That this in itself is something which will need a long time to discuss this. But now I feel that we have come to the end, whether good or bad. We have talked a great deal, and I know that some of you are going to go. How many are going tomorrow? Well, everybody is going. So never mind. No. Huh? Oh no, everybody is going away, tomorrow. They won't see us tomorrow. It's going away tomorrow. Oh, there's a few people. Well, I would like to say to those of you who are going that for me it has been a greatest privilege and a greatest joy to be with you, really. And I hope that I haven't made you tired of all these things. And as I said, if you want to forget everything, forget those points. Just a few of them you can remember. But always remember that Baha'u'llah has to be with us. This is the thing. And this is the whole, the essence of all that we have said in our service. And that He comes to us to our assistance. He helps us. He supports us. And all this love that we have for each other, the joy and the love that is in our hearts, is not because of ourselves. Now don't mistake that. All this love which brings us together and makes us to become like one people is not because of us, that we are very important people, that we are very special people in that sense. All of this love and this joy and this unity is because of Baha'u'llah. It is His revelation. It is the forces that He has released in the world, and it is that which comes through our hearts and makes us to become one. Otherwise, if you divorce that from it, what had we in common? All of us. Very little. Nothing. And in spite of all our weaknesses, we were talking about the weaknesses of our assemblies. In spite of all the weaknesses of our assemblies, look at the way the faith is growing. Look at the way we are holding on together. If it wasn't for the cause of God and the power of Baha'u'llah, do you think we would be staying together for more than one day in a local assembly? You will disband it immediately and say, go home, we don't want to get into this thing. Oh no. But it is the cause of God, and it is the early stages. And the only thing which will help us to really become happy people and to become and to see that the cause goes forward is to love each other through Baha'u'llah. Love, if this love is not there, then we have to fight the spiritual battle. If I cannot see everybody with the eye of love and unity, then I have to fight my spiritual battle. And as I said, we must look into each other's faces and see a trace of Baha'u'llah, and then it will all work. Well.
One question on terminology. In English translations, Soviet Effendi talks much of the greater covenant. I think he means that of Baha'u'llah. Yes, of Baha'u'llah. One with God, I think not. And then the lesser is Baha'u'llah, and so on through the manifestation.
That's right.
But besides, at one point he says sometimes God's greater plan intercedes. Well, so as you see it, the ocean of the immersive subject is sort of coming to all, bigger ocean up above God, and then the previous
Well, I suppose you can say these things.
I'm asking on your account.
Yes. Well, the covenant of God with man is something all-encompassing. The covenant of Baha'u'llah is only for his followers. It's only addressed to the followers. And that the plan of God is something overall, which will include all human beings. And Shoghi Effendi says sometimes these two plans will run into each other. Well, friends, I want to say farewell to some of you who are going, and I hope that we will see and hear about you all wonderful things that happens in this country. And I cannot say to you how much I have been happy and delighted to meet with the friends. So, these questions, I'll leave them on this table until tomorrow. Oh no, we are not supposed to put anything here. Okay, well, we'll take them. And so, thank you very much. Thank you. Oh, no, please, sit down. Please. Oh, thank you very much. Thank you. Are we going?
Yeah, we'll be here this evening. The program begins at 7. We'll be here.
Well, thank you, John. I feel that we could deal with some of these questions, and then as we go on, I'm sure a lot of subjects will open up that we can talk about. Yesterday and day before, as some of you may know, we dealt with a comprehensive sort of survey of the life of a Baha'i. And the theme was, what should we do? How can we live to enable our faith to grow? And I think we still can talk about that, naturally. You can talk around it and about this. But I think this morning I will pick up this question here. Is the person who has written this here? You have. It says, please tell the story. Oh, story about circumambulation. I thought you meant the wisdom of it, or this, or the yes. Well, first of all, I think I will mention this circumambulating, as you know, in the faith, this is a way of showing one's love and devotion to one that you worship as your God, as your Lord. You circumambulate around him. And this is actually a law, this is a principle of nature. Again, in nature you can find a parallel for this. You will find always an object which depends upon its creator. It revolves around it. For instance, the earth revolves around the sun. It's in love with it. This is a love relationship. And the satellite revolves around the earth. It is the force of love, really, as we know. I mean, from the point of view of physics, we know what holds the satellite in motion. It is that force of attraction, which is the love and the speed of its action that make it circumambulate its beloved. And so it is a law of nature that if you depend on someone as your creator, you circumambulate around it. And this is why when you go to the shrines, the act of circumambulating the shrine is an act of devotion to your Lord. In the writings we come across this statement many a times, that the lovers circumambulate around their beloved. Now, the story of circumambulation, which is a story I mentioned to our friend in here, and he has recorded it in his tape. I think I am always reluctant to talk about these accounts unless it is in writing. I feel we must be very accurate in quoting these things, because when the disciples of Baha'u'llah have recorded such incidents or such accounts, they have recorded it to the best of their ability and knowledge. And all we can do is to translate it and convey it. To try to put our own words to it, it sort of snowballs a little bit. I mentioned yesterday that we must not try to verbally communicate these stories. And this particular story that you have asked me to say, and I don't know how you come to know about it, probably Red must have told you this. He's hiding away there. This is already recorded in the videotape. Well, I will tell you the story, but don't go and tell everybody about this. Really, just keep it for yourself. Because I say this to you. First of all, such stories which relate to us the greatness of the cause, and such stories which relate to us things like miracles, things which sounds and looks like miracles. These things we are not supposed to consider them as miracles, because Baha'u'llah says, do not attribute any miracles to him. He says this will degrade the station of the manifestation of God. These accounts are only good for people who have seen them. And often people who had seen some of these accounts, I remember when I was a young boy, and they wouldn't tell us. They were very reluctant to talk about it because they didn't want to make it a point by which people would say, oh yes, this is the proof of the truth of this faith. You know, we never bring miracles as the proof of the truth of this faith. And as I said, Baha'u'llah says no one should attribute miracles to him. Although Abdul Baha has said that you can talk about it because it will give people joy and excitement, and it will uplift the souls to think about it. But we are not attributing miracles here. As I said, Baha'u'llah says it will degrade the station of the manifestation of God. Now, they were reluctant, those people who were the origin of all these stories, they were reluctant to say it because, and especially when there were people who were not Baha'is, they would never say it to them. They would wait till people really become deep in the faith who could sort of take it and put it in the right perspective. Now, I will tell you the story of Baha'u'llah. You know that when Baha'u'llah was in the house of Abud, that's the time that he, as you know, he spent about 7 years in those two houses, which is now called the house of Abud. And he had never seen a blade of grass, really, something green, trees, which he was so fond of. He really kept, as I said yesterday, the manifestation of God submits himself entirely to what his enemies do to him. He never uses his powers to stop them persecuting him. And so Baha'u'llah submitted to his enemies. And he did not leave that house. Although several governors who had come, they were so friendly. Some of them became so much the admirers of Abdul Baha. And in one or two cases, they even met Baha'u'llah in the house of Abud. That they became so much carried away with his powers, and they saw his glory, that they openly said that, of course, Baha'u'llah could leave the town if he wanted it. And Abdul Baha could leave the town if he wanted it. But you see, they were incarcerated in that city according to the edict of the Sultan. Now, Baha'u'llah had mentioned to Abdul Baha on one occasion that it is 9 years, he said, that he had not seen any sceneries of green and trees and flowers. And Abdul Baha immediately realized that his will now is that he should leave this place. And as you all may have heard, I'm sure, he went out and he rented these gardens outside Baghdad, outside Akka, known as the mansion of Mazra'e nowadays. The mansion of Mazra'e, as you see it now, those of you who have seen it, has been developed further since those days of Baha'u'llah. In those days were much smaller and much more primitive than what it is today, but certain basic part of the house is still there. The room of Baha'u'llah is still there, and all those things. Things have been added to it. Things have not really, there's not much change in it, except things have been added to it. Rooms have been added to it. So, Abdul Baha rented this for a very reasonable price. And then he arranged the making of a special carriage. In those days there were no such thing as carriages around. And then he came to Baha'u'llah and he said, the carriage is ready, the gardens, the house outside is ready, and that he said, please, you can come out and let's go. Baha'u'llah said to him, no. He said no. He was a prisoner and he was staying there. Now here is a point that you must remember. I mentioned yesterday, the relationship that Baha'u'llah and Abdul Baha had was not the same relationship as an ordinary son and the father. You know how it is, how informal is the relationship of the son and the father. That Abdul Baha could sort of insist and persist and say, oh please come on, let's go, and this sort of thing. It wasn't like this. Baha'u'llah was his Lord. He had recognized him so much that none of us can ever recognize Baha'u'llah to that extent. And he showed such humility and such submissiveness to Baha'u'llah that no person can ever do. And in fact, it was Abdul Baha who taught the believers. You know, whenever believers came to the Holy Land, to attain the presence of Baha'u'llah, Abdul Baha would prepare them for coming in contact with Baha'u'llah. He would even look at their clothes and see whether their clothes were good enough. And if it wasn't, which in many cases were not, he would give them a new coat, new clothes to wear, so that when they go into the presence of Baha'u'llah, they are very well, they look their best. And so, and he taught them the lessons in humility and self-effacement.